Chapter 1198. Late at night, Dongqing Hongguang, who had fallen asleep, received a call from Dongqing Wudi. The old man was 80 years old. Although his martial arts foundation at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm was still there, the aging of his body was inevitable. He had been living like a prince for many years, and had gradually let go of his martial arts. His state began to decline more than a decade ago. As he grew older, his spirit began to deteriorate, so he generally went to bed early and got up early. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when the phone rang. Usually, Dongqing Hongguang would get up and take a walk on the mountain in about an hour if there was no accident. The timing of Dongqing Wudi's call was subtle, which was enough to show the urgency of the matter. Turning on the chandelier in the bedroom, Dongqing Hongguang sat on the bed and shook his head hard. Outside the bedroom, there were rapid but light and not the slightest messy footsteps. As one of the few veterans of the older generation in Zhongzhou State, the minister of army headquarters more than 20 years ago, and the anchor of the giant group, Dongqing Hongguang's health was of great importance to everyone, not only his enemies but also his own people. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as Dongqing Hongguang was still there, the giant group might be lonely, but it would never disappear. It was the same as the Li family back then. How earth-shattering was the case of treason. But Li Honghe could still leave Yuzhou with nearly 2,000 elites of the Li family and enter the border. It was not a complete retreat, but it also preserved the core strength that should be preserved. So when the light in Dongqing Hongguang's bedroom was turned on, the highly focused guard on duty had pressed the call button. The medical team that the parliament had assigned to Dongqing Hongguang rushed out with instruments and all kinds of drugs in line with Dongqing Hongguang's physical condition, and stood at the door of Dongqing Hongguang's room. "I'm fine." Dongqing Hongguang shook his head. When he saw the caller ID on the phone, he quickly sobered up. He held the phone, said something to the door, and then continued, "Go back and rest." "Yes." There was a crisp and powerful voice outside the door, and the footsteps gradually faded away and finally disappeared. The phone call from Dongqing Wudi also stopped. Dongqing Hongguang thought about it, and called Dongqing Wudi directly back. The phone rang once and was quickly connected. The roar of the helicopter's roar came faintly from the other end of the phone. Dongqing Hongguang frowned slightly, and Dongqing Wudi's apologetic voice rang in his ears. "Dad, am I disturbing your rest?" "I'm fine." Dongqing Hongguang's voice was steady. "I'm old. I don't have much sleep. If I want to sleep, I'll have plenty of chances in the future." Before Dongqing Wudi could say anything, he smiled and asked directly, "What's the matter?" "The president just left my place." Dongqing Wudi did not hesitate to enter the whole body directly. The internal style of the Dongqing clan had always been straightforward. It was the standard military style, iron-blooded and direct, and what they disliked most was nonsense. Dongqing Hongguang narrowed his eyes and answered with confusion. "It's about Tianlan." Dongqing Wudi's voice was a little unclear in the roar of the helicopter's rotors, but every word reached Dongqing Hongguang's ears. Just yesterday, Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, and Gu Xingyun besieged Tianlan and suffered a crushing defeat. Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun escaped with serious injuries. Li Guangtu was captured alive by Tianlan and brought back to Xianyuan City. The president is here for this matter. Dongqing Hongguang froze in place and did not speak for a while. He had a regular schedule and went to bed early. When the news that Li Tianlan had seriously injured the three masters and really established his invincible status spread throughout the dark world, Dongqing Hongguang had already fallen asleep. This was undoubtedly a very important piece of good news, but it was okay to know the good news later, so no one disturbed Dongqing Hongguang's sleep. Dongqing Hongguang himself did not expect that Li Tianlan would bring such a huge impact to him within a few minutes after waking up. After a long time, Dongqing Hongguang took a deep breath and smiled. "Okay," he whispered softly, almost murmuring, with an imperceptible tremor. This piece of news came to his ears abruptly, driving away all his drowsiness. Thousands of words were constantly brewing in his heart. This day was too long. The past was vivid in his mind. Time was like a knife, and the pictures of the past were constantly flashing in his mind. That year, Li Honghe, who was still at his peak, left the mountain of the Dongqing clan with the newborn baby in his arms. Dongqing Hongguang stood on the top of the mountain, silently watching the old and the little figure get farther and farther away. In front of them was the spreading frost and snow. At that time, Dongqing Hongguang told himself that 20 years later, the child taken away would become the pillar of the giant group, and even the whole Zhongzhou state. Invincible and invincible. More than 20 years. The Dongqing clan had been waiting for this day for too long. There were accidents, setbacks, pain, and uneasiness. But in the end, they got the result they wanted most. Dongqing Hongguang was in a daze. He did not know what to say for a while except for the word good. The bedroom door was slowly pushed open. Uncle Fu, the old butler of the Dongqing clan, came in with a cup of tea, put it in front of Dongqing Hongguang, and quietly left. Dongqing Hongguang finally came to his senses and took a deep breath. The corners of his mouth curled up uncontrollably. His hand that was holding the phone kept trembling, but his voice was still steady as he hummed in agreement. The president wants to get Li Guangtu back from Tianlan, and hopes that we can communicate with Tianlan. Communicate? Dongqing Wudi whispered. I'm on my way to the airport now, ready to fly straight to Tiannan. There was no airport in Tiannan at present. Flying straight to Tiannan obviously would not take a passenger plane. The sound of the helicopter was whistling. Dongqing Wudi obviously took a helicopter from the Hidden Dragon Sea to the nearest military airport, and took a fighter jet straight to Xianyuan City. With the speed of the fighter jet, and the speed of Dongqing Wudi's arrival at the airport, Dongqing Wudi could appear in Emperor Dong's palace within an hour. That's an expected attitude. Dongqing Hongguang said lightly, then frowned slightly. You're in a hurry. Dongqing Wudi was silent, then smiled and said, at this time he could naturally go to Xianyuan City to communicate with Li Tianlan, but such a hurry might stimulate Li Tianlan's reverse psychology. Of course, he had to go to Xianyuan City, but there was no need to be too anxious. The parliament was indeed worried about Li Guangtu's life, but if Li Tianlan really wanted to kill him, he would not have taken him back to Xianyuan City. You take a passenger plane to Nanyuan City, and enter Xianyuan City from there. Dongqing Hongguang said calmly. Dongqing Wudi hesitated and said with a smile, Okay. What on earth did the academics promise Tianlan to make you so anxious? Dongqing Hongguang smiled faintly. They relented about the Border Control Corps. Dongqing Wudi said, What else? Dongqing Hongguang asked indifferently. The Border Control Corps was indeed a problem, but if the Dongqing clan fought for it with all its might, there was at least a 70% chance of winning the position. The only variable was that some of the backbone forces at other levels of the Border Control Corps might be transferred away, so as to weaken the Dongqing clan's influence on the Border Control Corps. Li Huaqing mentioned the Border Control Corps, but in fact, what he offered was not the position of a commander, but the position of a part of the backbone forces. These were naturally very tempting, but not enough. This was not like Li Huaqing's style. He was not so narrow-minded. He means to let Hanbing enter Yuzhou, and let Qing Chao lead the Border Control Corps. Dongqing Wudi continued. Dongqing Hongguang was stunned and narrowed his eyes. He understood Li Huaqing's meaning immediately. Dongqing Hongguang slowly stood up, took a sip of tea, and suddenly said, These are all for the giant group. What about Tianlan? Li Tianlan was from the Dongqing clan. Li Huaqing had made sure of this. But now no one dared to say that Emperor Dong's palace belonged to the giant group. Li Huaqing said that these were all benefits for the giant group, but what could he give Li Tianlan? Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while, then whispered the most important condition given by Li Huaqing, Beijiang. Chapter 1199. Li Huaqing offered the heaviest bargaining chip. No matter what other thoughts he had in his heart, or whether he would be very reluctant, in that kind of negotiation atmosphere, the bargaining chip he offered must be fully guaranteed to be fulfilled. Beijiang. This was what he planned to use to stabilize Emperor Dong's palace. The province of 1.7 million square kilometers was equivalent to 1/6 of the total area of Zhongzhou state. It was the largest province in Zhongzhou state, and a province that had always been coordinated by Zhongzhou state councillors. This was an unparalleled temptation. It was also an unprecedented challenge. For Emperor Dong's palace, this was the case. The new group was rising in Zhongzhou state with incomparable vigor. Everyone inside and outside the game could see its increasingly clear outline. With Xianyuan City as the core and Jiangxia as the foundation, the shadow of Emperor Dong's palace was slowly shrouding Dongshan, Jiangnan, Xie and Nanyue. If Beijiang was added, the new group almost had a kind of power that was almost no less than that of the Southeast group. If Tiannan also became a part of Zhongzhou State in the future, with its special geographical location and source, Tiannan Province would inevitably have an absolute position in the future. From another perspective, as long as Li Tianlan could keep his current territory, in 5 or 10 years, the new group would be a supergroup with 3 counselors in the worst case. The strength of the Southeast group lay in its 2 extremely stable promotion channels in Wuyue and Beijiang. As long as Emperor Dong's palace accepted Li Huaqing's conditions, they would have 2 extremely stable promotion channels in Nanyue and Beijiang. In the future, Tiannan would be added. In his current state, 10 years later, there was no need to use uncertain adjectives such as almost, probably and perhaps. The new group would inevitably become the most powerful group in Zhongzhou State in 10 years. There was no doubt about this. Li Huaqing means who will go to Beijiang. Dongcheng Hongguang's voice was a little low. Dongcheng Wudi thought for a moment and said softly, he didn't say. Dongcheng Hongguang laughed, and his voice seemed to be mixed with sneer and emotion. Beijiang was in front of them. It was an opportunity, a temptation and a problem. The most difficult thing was that the new group had no one. The new group had a lot of talents. Not to mention others, just in Jiangxia, the team that Wu Zhengmin had painstakingly brought out for more than 20 years was enough to support a large group in time. What was the situation of Jiangxia in recent years? Since the Li family, Wu Zhengmin had been firmly rooted here. They seemed to be a part of the Southeast group, but as the territory of the Li family, Jiangxia faced the ubiquitous pressure from the Southeast group and the covetous eyes of other major groups. Everyone wanted to break up the last bit of the Li family's power and take Jiangxia into their own hands. Jiangxia had been very stable in the past 20 years, but it was also unstable. All kinds of transfers were carried out intermittently. Under such circumstances, it was a miracle that Wu Zhengmin could stand firm in Jiangxia. This was not his own miracle, but a miracle that belonged to the entire Jiangxia. Those who were able to walk to the top and become Wu Zhengmin's trusted aides were all true elites left behind by the great waves. There weren't many of them, but each of them could hold their own, be it in terms of ability or loyalty. They were all top-notch. With Wu Zhengmin's entry into the cabinet and the establishment of Emperor Dong's palace, Jiangxia began to rise. Zhou Yuanshan entered Jiangxia. Wang Jingxin left Linen. Dongqing Qiuqi followed closely. Jiangxia had made all kinds of big moves in recent years. As the outline of the new group became more and more clear, the forces of the entire Jiangxia began to break into the righteous altar of Zhongzhou State in a very aggressive manner. This was the greatest wealth that Li Honghe had left to Li Tianlan, and its significance was even greater than that of the veterans of the Li family standing beside Li Tianlan now. The new group was now in a clear but secretive structure. With this election, 6 of the 13 congressmen in Jiangxia would take more important positions, including the governor of Nanyue, the speaker of Dongshan, the governor of Dongshan, the governor of Dongshan, the speaker of Xie, the governor of Jiangnan, and so on. This was the full outbreak of the power of Jiangxia after more than 20 years of accumulation. It was like the sun piercing the dark sky, symbolizing the rising sun of the new group. In another 5 years, with the current team of the new group, they might be able to win more key positions of congressmen, but they needed to stay there for 5 years. Judging from the current situation, no one in the new group had the qualifications to compete for the position of congressman, and no one had the qualifications to go to a key province like Beijiang. That was why there was the initial integration of the giant group and the new group. According to the normal development, the giant group would be integrated into the new group sooner or later. As the heavenly son from the Dongqing clan, the Bai family and the Zhou family in Yuzhou all fully approved of Li Tianlan inheriting all this. But it took time. It was necessary to complete many exploratory integration in the elections again and again to ensure that there was no too much turbulence and backlash within the giant group. Otherwise, Emperor Dong's palace would not absorb help. It would be constant trouble and internal instability. Now in this election, only 5 people, or 4, had been confirmed to join the new group from the giant group. The first one was by Qingqian. She was undoubtedly qualified to go to Beijiang. As an extraordinary woman in the altar of Zhongzhou state, although Bai Qingqian was a woman, she could be called one of the most powerful chairmen in Zhongzhou state. It was not the kind of unreasonable oppression. In the working state, Bai Qingqian had a sharp and clear mind, a strong sense of the overall situation, a good sense of advance and retreat, aggressive sharpness, and steady as a rock. In the eyes of the outside world, Bai Qingqian joining the new group was definitely a good move. If she continued to stay in the giant group, the position of congressman might be her end. But now, after joining the new group, with the strong rise of Emperor Dong's palace, Bai Qingqian might very well become the second female prime minister since the founding of Zhongzhou state. History always repeated itself. The first female prime minister since the founding of Zhongzhou state came from the Wang family of Beihai, which was the period when the Wang family of Beihai quickly reached its peak. Now, with Emperor Dong's palace constantly sprinting toward the peak, who could be sure that Bai Qingqian could not reach this level? After Bai Qingqian, the second confirmed to join the new group from the giant group was Cheng Huaining, the highest commander of the European garrison. After the election, he would be transferred back to Yuzhou and become the spokesperson of the new group in the army headquarters. The third and fourth were the husband and wife, Zhou Yuanshan and Dongqing Qiuqi. Zhou Yuanshan was the absolute core flag task of the giant group after 20 years. His joining the new group represented the decision of the integration of the giant group and the new group. Heart. Now Zhou Yuanshan was the governor of Nanyue. The giant group and the new group were trying their best to push him to the position of Speaker of Nanyue in the election. Nanyue's economy was extremely developed. Although it was occasionally overtaken by Wuyue inexplicably, Nanyue was the only place that was qualified to compete with Wuyue for the position of the first province in Zhongzhou state. Almost all the speakers were congressmen. Zhou Yuanshan, who was 38 years old, was undoubtedly not qualified to be a member of parliament. The direction of the giant group and the new group's efforts was to push Zhou Yuanshan into the parliament and serve as an honorary member of parliament. Another name for honorary member of parliament was alternate member of parliament. It had a certain power of a member of parliament. It could participate in the meeting of the parliament and had the right to speak, but it had no right to vote. But as long as he could enter the parliament, express his views, and have ideological confrontation with the giants, it was enough for Zhou Yuanshan. The honorary member of parliament could barely stay in Nanyue, so the two groups were now sparing no effort to promote Zhou Yuanshan. Similarly, Zhou Yuanshan was also a candidate who could barely go to Beijiang. But no one would be willing to give up Nanyue and choose Beijiang. The bargaining chip offered by Li Huaqing was indeed tempting enough, but it was also like a dilemma, because the new group could not push out a candidate who could go to Beijiang to serve as the speaker for the time being. The giant group had such a candidate, but it was already their plan to let 4 people join the new group. At this time, if they let a member of parliament enter the new group, there would inevitably be turbulence inside the giant group. Now the best choice seemed to be to let Bai Qingqian give up the position of deputy prime minister and go to Beijiang. After all, Li Huaqing still agreed with some of Chen Fangqing's ideas. He also did not want to see the emergence of a new group that was too strong in the cabinet. But his approach was relatively mild, which was equivalent to exchanging the largest province of Zhongzhou state for a position in the cabinet. This is a good bargaining chip. Dongqing Hongguang said faintly. It's just a complete exchange, an exchange of duties. In fact, we even suffer a loss. That's it. Does he still want to exchange for Li Kuang too? Does he want to get something for nothing? Tianlan won't agree. Dongqing Wudi laughed. Then why are you still going to Xianyuan City? Dongqing Hongguang raised his eyebrows. I'm in a hurry now because I'm waiting for Li Huaqing's new bargaining chip. In addition, I want you to give me some advice. Maybe we should take the initiative and make some requests. The corner of Dongqing Hongguang's mouth moved, and he fell silent. Dongqing Wudi smiled, with a touch of high enthusiasm and excitement in his voice. Tonight, before Li Huaqing came to me, many people contacted me. Dongqing Hongguang raised his eyebrows slightly. Star State Army Department, Men in Black, German Army Department, England Army Department, France, Kunlun City. All kinds of forces, there are about 20. Dongcheng Wudi chuckled. Dongcheng Hongguang froze for a moment, and then laughed. That thing, is it settled? It's been brewing for a few months, and now the time is ripe. I signed my name on the document, and the result is as we expected. Dongcheng Wudi laughed and said, maybe at this time the news has begun to explode in the dark world. He held his mobile phone, looked out of the window at the deep night, and whispered, Old Master, our time has really come. Chapter 1200. The busy crowd began to disappear. All kinds of instruments were turned off one by one. In the secret room that gradually quieted down, the mechanical clock on the wall ticked. Jiang Shangyu looked at the communication that had been hung up, and turned to look at Gu Xingyun. In 3 hours we'll go back to China. Ha! Gu Xingyun sneered, but there was an extremely weak look in his eyes. His breakthrough was smoother than he had imagined. In just a few days, he went from close to the peak of the invincible realm to the top of the peak of the invincible realm. In terms of physical fitness alone, his physical fitness had exceeded the boundary of the peak of the invincible realm. Such a huge and explosive progress could be said to be a meteoric rise. In this state, Gu Xingyun was sure that he could easily beat 3 or 5 of himself before the breakthrough. He thought he was standing at the peak of the dark world. This feeling didn't change even after he lost to Li Tianlan. There was only one person who was truly invincible in the world. But others also had the power to stand at the peak. Whether Li Tianlan was there or not, Gu Xingyun felt that he was standing at the top of the dark world. His body had crossed the uncrossable boundary. As long as he was given time, in 3 or 5 years, he was confident that he could completely improve his realm and reach the level of Li Kuangtu. He thought that in this way he could lead Kunlun City to continue to take root in Zhongzhou State. Maybe he would face the oppression of Emperor Dong's palace, but with allies like Jiang Shangyu and Li Kuangtu, his future would never be desperate and gloomy. But now, he did have the power to stand at the peak of the dark world. But other than that, he had nothing. What else can I do when I go back to China? Gu Xingyun said lightly. Jiang Shangyu glanced at him. Your mentality will make me lose my confidence in you. The current situation is really bad, but it's not unacceptable. We still have a chance, and our cooperation. It's your cooperation with Zhongzhou State. Gu Xingyun said in a cold voice. Does Kunlun City have the capital to cooperate with you now? What does your cooperation with Zhongzhou State have to do with me? Do you think it's a betrayal? Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes. Does it matter? Gu Xingyun said with a faint smile. Of course it is important. Jiang Shangyu nodded. You are our ally, and Kunlun City is a very important part of our strength. As I said at the beginning, it will be beneficial for both of us if we cooperate. He paused for a moment, then laughed again. And besides standing on my side, do you have any other choice? It looks like it, but it's only looks. You can reject everything we talked about today, and leave Zhongzhou State angrily. For Zhongzhou State, this is a betrayal. Li Huaqing's thunderous fury is not something you can handle. Because at your position, once you leave Zhongzhou State, you will violate the bottom line of Zhongzhou State. No matter how stiff the relationship between Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan is, in this case he will let Li Tianlan clean up the mess. Without our allies, you are no match for Li Tianlan now. Or are you going to seek refuge with Li Tianlan? Just like hundreds of years ago, when you turned to the Lin clan, and then wagged your tail beside the original Li family. Jiang Shangyu smiled brightly. Let's not talk about dignity. You and I both know that dignity is not important in the face of survival. But do you really think Li Tianlan can accept your surrender? It's impossible. You know that. Li Tianlan can't tolerate you. He wants to annex the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Many people in the Purgatory of Heaven capital can't tolerate you. And the elders of the Li family who stay with Li Tianlan can't tolerate you either. So you can't join Emperor Dong's palace. Even if Li Tianlan temporarily takes you in, you are just a dog at his feet. Even worse than a dog. You can only be cannon fodder to deal with us. When he uses you to clean us up, guess who will be the next one to die? Gu Xingyun listened with no expression. Jiang Shangyu rubbed his brand new arm. This was the real arm that he made for himself with his authority, before the real environment blocked the world. Feeling his arm becoming more and more flexible, he said in a flat voice, "Only we are your best allies and your best choice. What I can be sure of is that Li Tianlan's state when he fought with us was a little special. Show under normal circumstances, we are indeed no match for him, but there shouldn't be such a big gap between us. I'm not talking about whether we can catch up to his strength, but at the very least, his strength is within our understanding. In this kind of environment, if we attack him again, the result will definitely be different. You said it yourself." Gu Xingyun said coldly, "Only for now. The present is the present, and also the future." Jiang Shangyu smiled and said, "I think Li Tianlan has reached the peak state he can reach, at least infinitely close. In the future, Li Tianlan may make further progress, but it will not be too obvious. What is certain is that it is impossible for him to make a huge breakthrough in combat capability and reach the level of Wang Tianzong in Mormons. This is impossible." Gu Xingyun raised his head and looked at Jiang Shangyu seriously. Jiang Shangyu did not explain anything. Unknown had completely fallen. This was something he confirmed from absorbing Unknown's memories. The real environment had completely sealed off the Miracle City. It was theoretically possible for Li Tianlan to break through the blockade of the real environment by himself. But it was only in theory. If he wanted to break through the blockade of the real environment, Li Tianlan needed the real brand. But his true imprint was not complete. Li Tianlan's real brand, and a wisp of his soul were deep in Qin Weibai's real brand. This was the key to Huang Shi to protect Qin Weibai, and not let her die completely. But now it became the key to blocking Li Tianlan's room for progress. Because the real Qin Weibai had already died in the Eternal Sword. This also meant that Li Tianlan had no possibility to break through the blockade of the real environment. After his combat capability reached a certain level, because his soul and real brand were not complete, he would never make any progress in his life. Jiang Shangyu gently raised the corner of his mouth and said, "We don't have nothing now. We just take a step back for the time being. I still have a trump card in my hand." He looked at Gu Xingyun and whispered with a smile, "After going back, find a suitable opportunity, maybe I can play this card. Enjoy the look of making Li Tianlan collapse. How about it? Are you looking forward to it?" Chapter 1201. In the deep and obscure night, the fighter plane that took off from Yuzhou landed at a base in Nanyuan. Dongqing Wudi, who didn't waste any time along the way, walked alone on the prepared helicopter. In the roar of the rotors, the night of Nanyuan was receding, and the brilliant lights of Xianyuan City were getting closer and closer. Jiang Shangyu left the Secret Research Institute in South America. He and Gu Xingyun were going to a small city 200 kilometers away, then take a train across hundreds of kilometers of wilderness to another city, and then take a plane back to Zhongzhou State. The ground of America had been shaking slightly. The huge earthquake with continuous aftershocks was spreading to the entire American land plate, and there were whales everywhere. If the railway was destroyed, the train was naturally useless. Jiang Shangyu had begun to consider the route from South America to North America, and then to Zhongzhou State. After a sleepless night, Li Huaqing returned to his office in the Hidden Dragon Sea, and made a cup of strong tea by himself. Exhaustion hit his body and mind like a tide, but his brain was not sleepy at all. He looked at the clock on the wall, calculated the time after Dongqing Wudi arrived in Tiannan, and waited quietly for the news. Guo Wentian, the only leader of the Prince Group, had left the Hidden Dragon Sea after hanging up the communication with Jiang Shangyu a few hours ago. His current whereabouts were unknown, but it was clear that the Prince Group was now ready to welcome the new situation. Tiannan, Heaven Capital. The governor of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The sword energy that pervaded heaven and earth surged under the night sky. Daybreak, dawn, phoenix. Countless masters and elites of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital were still trapped in the headquarters. The sword energy blockade left by Li Tianlan didn't weaken at all. Standing in the center of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, and looking at the night sky, colorful sword lights flashed from time to time between heaven and earth, with sharpness and killing, trapping all the forces of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital that wanted to go out. No one could break through the sword energy left by Li Tianlan here, including Daybreak, another invincible realm expert in the purgatory of Heaven Capital. The surging sword energy swept the whole city. Daybreak once wanted to break through by force, but under the blockade of the sword energy, he could barely take 3 steps and had to retreat with serious injuries. No one could leave. But the news was still being passed on. Everyone already knew the cooperation between Li Guangtu and Gu Xingyun. They also knew that Li Guangtu was now captured by Li Tianlan. The atmosphere inside the purgatory of Heaven Capital became depressing and gloomy, and even a little dull. Snow Country. Wang Xiaoyao, who had returned with serious injuries after the battle in North Sea, locked himself in the dark hall, and looked at a lit LCD screen in the center of the hall. His eyes flickered, and no one knew what he was thinking. On the stage of Formidable Person in North Sea, Wang Shengxiao, who was wearing a coat of sword energy, looked at the vast sea in the distance without saying a word. Wang Tianzong's sword energy stood beside him, as if he seemed to be waiting for something quietly. The news that the 3 masters besieged Li Tianlan caused a stir in the dark world. But the dark world quickly fell silent again. Amidst the extreme pressure, every force and every person seemed to be waiting for something. Everyone knew what they were waiting for. The suffocating feeling was suffocating. At 4:50 in the morning, Zhongzhou State Time, Dongqing Wudi had just arrived in Xianyuan City. The news that everyone had been waiting for swept through the entire dark world at the speed of a hurricane, exploding everyone's thoughts. The army headquarters of Zhongzhou State, Kunlun City of Zhongzhou State, the Wang family of Beihai, Emperor Dong Palace, Sai City, Mount Shu Jade Pool, European Alliance, Shadow Throne, Snow Country Military Department, Sanctuary, Rothschild, Dark Knights, Star State, Men in Black, Army Headquarters, Fantasy World, Heroes Club, Burning Legion, Mercenaries on Fire, Death's Embrace, Shadow Blade, Flame Chariot. One country after another, one force after another formed the current dark world. That night, all the forces in the dark world jointly released a new message. This was undoubtedly an extremely rare thing. But to a certain extent, this wasn't a rare occurrence. Because the dark world had experienced many times in the past decades and centuries. It had been 5 years since all the major forces released the news together. Everyone knew very well that there was only one thing that could make all the countries and the major forces release the news together. This news might not be absolutely accurate, but it was also absolutely authoritative. It was a list that fully demonstrated the comparison of the peak power of each country and the major superpowers. To be more precise, it was the New World Divine List ranking. It included dozens of countries, all the superpowers, hundreds of second-class large forces, countless mercenary groups, and a large number of killer organizations. It included the entire dark world. After a series of games, it was recognized by all the forces and announced to the World Divine List ranking. Everyone was paying close attention to the list. On the short list, everyone could see the power of Zhongzhou State completely rising in the dark world. The 15th place on the World Divine List, the last place. The former commander of the Border Control Corps, the youngest marshal of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State, the disciple of Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong, Dijiang. Although Dijiang, who had been defeated by Li Tianlan, had been imprisoned in Beihai for the past 2 years, it was obvious that the dark world had not forgotten him. This list had been recognized by the Wang family of Beihai. In a sense, it seemed to indicate that Wang Shengxiao had plans to restart Dijiang in the near future. The 14th place on the World Divine List. 2 people tied. The Deputy Palace Master of Emperor Dong's Palace, the former number 1 of Samsara Palace. Heavenly King, Nirvana Sword Master of Mount Shu, Saint Wei Kunlun. Daybreak, the Lord of Sunluo Temple in Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The 2 broke through to the invincible realm at roughly the same time. Although they had not fought many times in the past few years, and it was difficult to compare, their specific realms were roughly the same. They both barely stabilized their invincible realm strength, and were good at using swords. There was some other meaning in putting these 2 people together on the 14th place on the World Divine List. The 13th place on the World Divine List was also tied with 2 people. The Deputy Palace Lord of Emperor Dong's Palace, the Governor of Sai City in Zhongzhou State, Situt Songyue, the hidden god of Zhongzhou State. Ramelun, the commander of the Burning Legion. The Burning Legion had taken root in Tiannan so far. It could be said that it was the strongest force in Tiannan, except for Emperor Dong's palace. Ramelun, the commander of the Burning Legion, and Situt Songyue were both experts who were close to the peak of the invincible realm. All the major forces recognized this ranking. If the parties involved did not recognize the tie, they could push down those who were as famous as themselves. The 12th place on the World Divine List. Afar, the chief of the Dark Knights. Afar's injury had not healed since the chaos in Snow Country, but he had recovered his combat capability. His strength was also recognized as slightly stronger than that of Situt Songyue and the others. The 11th place on the World Divine List. Moraid, the former deputy commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps in the Sanctuary and the chief of the Knights Templars. As an expert who was closest to the peak of the invincible realm, his strength was obviously stronger than the last few. Everyone recognized his ranking. The 10th place on the World Divine List. Paul, the current patriarch of Rothschild. The current patriarch of Rothschild, who was seriously injured after taking action once in the chaos of Snow Empire, seemed to be somewhat tragic, but his personal strength was beyond doubt. 9th on the World Divine List. Dark Knights Guild, Dark Queen Moongaze. There was no doubt that in the few years after the death of the master of Samsara Palace, Mochizuki Song, who had supported the Dark Knights alone, had become the most legendary female expert in the Dark World. 8th place on the World Divine List. Wang Xiaorao from the Wang family of Beihai. His ranking was ahead of Moongaze and Song, which was the result witnessed by the entire Dark World in the final battle of Beihai. 7th place on the World Divine List. Li Shi, the wife of the former governor of Kunlun City, and the current deputy palace master of Emperor Dong's palace. No adjectives were needed to prove his achievements. Everyone could see one fact clearly. That was Li Shi's strength. Li Shi, the peak of the invincible realm. To be exact, it started from Wang Xiaoyao, who ranked 8th on the World Divine List. The weakest of the top 8 on the World Divine List was at the peak of the invincible realm. This was a lineup that had never been seen on the World Divine List in the past hundreds of years. It signified an unprecedented amount of gold. It also meant that an incomparably grand era had completely descended. Chapter 1202. If Wang Xiaoyao, who ranked 8th on the World Divine List, had not clearly made the Dark World feel anything, then the appearance of Li Shi, the deputy palace master of Emperor Dong's palace, who ranked 7th, had completely made the Dark World realize that this year's World Divine List was incredibly valuable. Wang Xiaoyao was also at the peak of the invincible realm. It was just that he had hidden his strength for too long. Now that the news had spread, it gave people a feeling that he was very strong but also a little weak. But Li Shi was totally different. Before she officially became the deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace, most people in the Dark World did not even know who Li Shi was. Only a few superpowers upper echelons understood the power behind this name. As the center of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State in the past 2 decades, the names of Kunlun City and Zhongzhou State's war god Gu Xingyun could be said to be famous in the Dark World. But those super forces all knew very well that the person with the highest realm and the strongest combat capability in Kunlun City was not Gu Xingyun. It was Li Shi, the wife of the city governor of Kunlun City. When Gu Xingyun was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, Li Shi was already at the real peak of the invincible realm. Now Li Shi, who had been at the peak of the invincible realm for many years, announced to the whole Dark World that she had officially set foot in the Dark World after becoming the deputy palace master of Emperor Dong's palace. All the countries and forces in the world ranked her 7th. My ranking is low. Or was it too valuable? Gu Xingyun could be said to be a frequent visitor to the World Divine List in the past 20 years. The ranking of the Divine List took place once every 5 years. Gu Xingyun had been on the list for the past 4 times, from the initial 9th place all the way up. 10 years ago, Gu Xingyun, who was close to the peak of the invincible realm, ranked 4th on the Divine List. 5 years ago, Gu Xingyun, who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, ranked 5th on the Divine List. 4th or 5th. At that time, Gu Xingyan was not at the peak of the invincible realm. In the past few decades, the Dark World's impression of the peak of the invincible realm was that it was powerful, the peak, and irresistible. This realm represented the true upper limit of an individual's combat ability. It represented the top 5 or even the top 3 on the divine list. This was a combat power that could affect a superpower or superpower. Now Wang Xiaoyao, who was at the peak of the invincible realm, ranked 8th. Li Shi, who was at the peak of the invincible realm, ranked 7th. The peak of the invincible realm, which once represented the top of the divine list, could only be ranked in the middle this time. The whole dark world was shaking. Everyone knew that this might be the most terrifying divine list ranking in the dark world in hundreds of years. It looks like the whole thing is. The withering dark world was changing. After the major forces withdrew from the stage, there was less chaos, but more cruelty. What kind of world-shaking figure would be able to ascend to the top of the divine list, which was filled with so much value? After Li Shi, 6th place on the world divine list. Gu Xingyun, the state-protecting war god of Zhongzhou State and the governor of Kunlun City. His breakthrough had been confirmed by the Dark World, and the news that the 3 experts besieged Donghuang had also spread throughout the Dark World. As a newly advanced expert at the peak of the invincible realm, under normal circumstances, he should rank behind Li Shi and even behind Wang Xiaoyao. However, in the end, Gu Xingyan was still ranked 6th in the rankings that all the major forces agreed upon. The reason? The reason was that Gu Xingyan, Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu besieged Li Tianlan together. Although Gu Xingyan was seriously injured, he did not die. This was the only reason, and it was also the reason that all the major countries and forces recognized it. Just because he did not die after besieging Li Tianlan, he was ranked ahead of Li Shi and Wang Xiaorao. The top 5 of the world divine list, which had always represented the peak of the dark world's combat power, had already been changed. 5th place on the world divine list. First commander of the Border Control Corps of Zhongzhou State, Li Guangtu of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. This was a ranking that was subject to a lot of controversy, but was finally pushed out reluctantly. In fact, in the previous divine list, the 2nd to the 4th would be a little controversial. But since it could be finally determined, it represented the recognition of the whole dark world. The absolute genius of the Li family in the past, the deity who could once compete with the Sword Emperor, was ranked 5th on the divine list. This had something to do with him being captured by Li Tianlan. But in any case, within 5 years, unless Li Guangtu could kill the people ahead of him, this ranking would be unshakable. 4th place on the world divine list. There was no title, and there was even little introduction. It was just a name. Jiang Shangyu. Under the information of the divine list, almost everyone listed a lot of battle records. Jiang Shangyu's battle records were the least described, but his battles were the most dangerous. He had fought against Li Tianlan 3 times. His combat capability surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. Everyone felt that he deserved the 4th place on the world divine list. The top 3 of the world divine list were the peak of the peak. Every name was so dazzling. 3rd place on the world divine list. Former patriarch of the Lin clan, Lin Fengting. Lin Fengting, who rarely fought and was even in a state of seclusion, would fight. His record of fighting was more than Jiang Shangyu's. He was a super veteran expert who had been in the dark world for decades. As the Lin clan's activities in the dark world became more and more intense, their former patriarch was finally pushed to the 3rd place on the world divine list. 2nd place on the world divine list. Wang Shengxiao, patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. This was a ranking that made the dark world feel emotional, but they had to admit that it was not a wrong ranking. The 2nd place on the world divine list could be said to be a person, or a ray of sword energy. He was Wang Shengxiao. But to some extent, it was the sword energy of Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong that pushed Wang Shengxiao to the 2nd place on the divine list. Perhaps many people would not be convinced by Wang Shengxiao, but who in the dark world could say no to Wang Tianzong's sword energy? The sword energy was added to Wang Shengxiao. Under the 6 paths of reincarnation, Wang Shengxiao's combat capability would be infinitely close to Wang Tianzong's in the period of Mormons. It was completely natural for him to be ranked 2nd on the divine list. The first place on the divine list meant that he was absolutely invincible in today's dark world. There could be no dispute. It seemed that people had begun to discuss it a few years ago. Until now, it was recognized by all the superpowers, and countless forces in the dark world. Li Tianlan had a name that was recognized by the whole world. Dong Huang. The first place on the divine list, the palace master of Eastern Palace, Li Tianlan. There was no doubt, no argument, no challenge. Challenge? A day ago, the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th on the divine list had already jointly challenged. They were seriously injured and defeated. A little further away, the second place on the divine list also challenged Li Tianlan, and was also defeated. Further away, Morade Ramiro Paul, Wang Xiaorao. They had confirmed the look in their eyes. They were all people who had been taught a lesson by Li Tianlan. The divine list of the world was shining brightly in the dark world. It was boiling, restless, and spreading. That year, Li Tianlan was about to be 23 years old. He stood at the highest point of the world's martial arts, and looked back at the top of the divine list. Behind him were 14 so-called big shots who were equally famous in the dark world. That year, Li Tianlan had not really touched the end of martial arts. But in the current dark world he was already the Real Supreme. So in his eyes, the so-called world divine list. 14 experts in the invincible realm, or beyond the invincible realm. Except for a few friends. The rest were non-entities. Chapter 1203. The sky above Yuzhou City turned bright. In the spacious and luxurious office of the Hidden Dragon Sea, Li Huaqing stared at the computer desktop in front of him, and was silent for a long time. He did not expect that he, who had been waiting for the news that Dongqing Wudi brought about the compromise between Emperor Dong's palace and Li Tianlan, would wait for the new ranking on the divine list. The ranking of the divine list was a major event in the dark world. It could even be said to be the top priority. 15 people on the divine list. It could be said that the various superpowers flaunted their military might every year. The ranking was held once every 5 years, and each ranking took about 3 months to sort out and communicate. Li Huaqing knew about the divine list. This started a few months ago. At that time, Li Tianlan was still in the desert prison. The ranking, especially the top ranking, was highly controversial. In the beginning, the European alliance ranked Lin Fengting first. East Island and Star State thought that Li Guangtu should be ranked first. Zhongzhou State recognized Wang Tianzong, who had disappeared in the dark world but did not die. Of course, someone mentioned Li Tianlan. But at that time, Li Tianlan was still in the desert prison, and had not entered the invincible realm. No one thought he was the first. However, after several discussions, people had tacitly agreed that Li Tianlan would occupy a place in the top 5 of the divine list. But the next few months were turbulent. After leaving the desert prison, Li Tianlan could be said to have soared to the sky. He was like the blazing sun of this era, hanging in the sky of the dark world, illuminating everything with a light that would never fall. Li Huaqing quietly looked at the list in front of him. The news of the ranking of the divine list swept across the world like a hurricane in the dark world. The first to upload the list was the dark side of the world. Everyone who truly integrated into the dark world knew the dark side of the world. This was not a faction. Instead, it was a website that people in the industry understood but outsiders could not enter no matter what. This was the largest network platform in the dark world. All the words could be translated into the languages of various countries. Any major event in the dark world would appear on the website as soon as possible. The dark side of the world had appeared in the dark world for hundreds of years. Every time the divine list ranking was released, it would be released first. The divine ranking released by the dark side of the world represented absolute authority. It was tantamount to an official announcement. This was a dark forum where countless people were active every day. On the homepage there were a lot of clear and concise but rich titles, radiating to every corner of the dark world, involving a series of secret transactions such as war employment, time-limited assassinations, arms trade, intelligence trafficking, and so on. The dark world was in turmoil every day, and at least 60% of the transactions were conducted through the dark side of the world. The dark forum, originally established by the Wang family of Beihai and Rothschild, had lasted for hundreds of years. Today, all the superpowers in the world, including Zhongzhou State, had a certain proportion of shares in the dark side of the world. It was no exaggeration to say that this was the official forum of the dark world. The post on the forum regarding the New World Divine List ranking had been pinned in red. It had been stuck for 5 years, and it would only be removed when the next Divine List ranking was announced. Li Huaqing silently opened the pinned post. An incomparably gorgeous list of names appeared in front of him. It was pure black with a hint of hazy scarlet. From Li Tianlan, who ranked first, to Dijiang, who ranked last. In the background of the list, there were countless seals in different styles, and the signatures of all the major countries. The army headquarters of Zhongzhou State, Kunlun City, Star State, Snow Country, the overall seal of the European Alliance, the seals of various European countries, the Shadow Throne, the Wang family of Beihai, Rothschild, the Dark Knights. The seals of all the forces were scattered in various places of the list as the background, providing absolute authority for the list. On the list, 15 golden names were arranged one by one, representing the highest majesty of the dark world. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and stared at Li Tianlan's name at the top of the list, his eyes twinkling. The divine list was a feast of the dark world, the ultimate force that all the major countries and forces showed off to the outside world. The dark world had never been peaceful. On the dark web, there were tens of thousands of agents and spies from all countries lurking every day. Countless killers and mercenaries accumulated their wealth in blood and sin. The games and calculations of all countries had never stopped. There were many things in the dark world that everyone had to fight for, but there were also many things that could be solved through negotiation. The ranking of the divine list represented absolute deterrence in a certain sense. Li Tianlan's ranking on the divine list would undoubtedly give Zhongzhou State a great initiative in the next international game. This was the role that a top expert could play for a country. From another perspective, the more Li Tianlan could bring to Zhongzhou State, the more confidence he had to ask for his own treatment. This was a very fair thing. That was to say, with the announcement of the divine list ranking and Li Tianlan's ranking on the top, Li Tianlan had another bargaining chip in his hand for many things in the future. The relationship between Emperor Dong's palace and Zhongzhou State was too subtle. The 2 years in the desert prison was Zhongzhou State's suppression of him. The shuffling of the giant group and the southeast group was also a suppression of him. The storm caused by Chen Fangqing's death also exposed the idea of Zhongzhou State's intention to suppress Emperor Dong's palace. Although this was just an idea that had not been implemented, the reason why it was not implemented had nothing to do with Emperor Dong's palace. And Li Huaqing insisted on protecting Gu Xingyun and suppressing the treason case that year, which to some extent touched the bottom line of Li Tianlan and the entire Li family. Li Huaqing said that he would give Li Tianlan an explanation. But the so-called explanation had not been seen yet, and Li Huaqing intended to forcibly rescue Li Guangtu from Li Tianlan. What would happen to Li Guangtu in Li Tianlan's hands? There would be many possibilities. Maybe Li Guangtu would be imprisoned in Emperor Dong's palace for the rest of his life. Maybe Li Guangtu would desperately fight with Li Tianlan and eventually die in Li Tianlan's hands. Maybe Li Guangtu would let go of the knot in his heart and accept Li Tianlan's position as the leader of the Li family. Maybe. There were many possibilities. But what would happen if Zhongzhou State rescued Li Guangtu from Li Tianlan's hands? There was only one result. Zhongzhou State's attitude was almost to support Li Guangtu, to let the purgatory of Heaven Capital and Emperor Dong's palace go tit for tat, even kill each other. Li Huaqing could say that he wanted to balance, talk about the future, talk about the overall situation. Whatever he said was good, dignified, or from the bottom of his heart. In any case, this was his position. From the standpoint of Emperor Dong's palace, Zhongzhou State's move was to let the Li family kill each other to maintain their so-called balance. This was the overall situation in Li Huaqing's eyes. How could Li Tianlan accept it? If suppressing the treason case had made the relationship between Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan drop to the freezing point, then Li Huaqing's intention to take Li Guangtu from Li Tianlan was tantamount to crossing Li Tianlan's bottom line. So even if Li Huaqing was the president, in the face of this situation, he had many concerns. He didn't even communicate with Li Tianlan in person. Instead, he asked Dongqing Wudi to go to Xianyuan City. But was this safe? Li Huaqing's eyes began to wander on the divine list again. This year's divine list had changed dramatically. Among them, there were some familiar figures. For example, Gu Xingyun, Li Guangtu, Situt Songyue, and Lin Fengting, who had never been on the divine list before but knew the dark world very well. 15 people on the divine list, 17 in the invincible realm, and most of them were newcomers. Wang Xingxiao, Jiang Shangyu, Wang Xiaoyao, Wang Wexiange. These names fiercely impacted the psychological defense line of everyone in the dark world. Especially Li Tianlan, who was on the top of the list, made everyone feel unbelievable, and at the same time sincerely convinced. This list was full of the old and the new. This was because the name list of the two intersecting eras had officially begun to reveal the era of Dong Huang. Dong Huang was 23 years old. Li Huaqing could find countless reasons why Li Tianlan did not dare to fall out with Zhongzhou State. But he could also find several reasons why Li Tianlan dared to fall out with him. At 23 years old, he was invincible in the world. At this age, no matter what he did, it wouldn't be too surprising. In the cold morning temperature, Li Huaqing took a light breath. Li Tianlan's ranking first on the divine list would bring great benefits to Zhongzhou State. But the premise was that Li Tianlan still belonged to Zhongzhou State. Li Huaqing had never thought of expelling Li Tianlan from Zhongzhou State. But in the current situation, if he wanted to stabilize Emperor Dong's palace, he had to pay more. During the period when the divine list was announced, and caused a sensation. If Li Tianlan was forced out of Zhongzhou State because of Li Guangtu, then Zhongzhou State would become the laughingstock of the dark world for at least a few decades in the future. And Li Tianlan, who was forced out of Zhongzhou State, would also become a nightmare that made Zhongzhou State breathless in the next few decades. This was the most unacceptable situation for Li Huaqing. Not to mention how many irresistible disasters Li Tianlan would bring to Zhongzhou State in such a situation. If Li Tianlan was really not in Zhongzhou State, there was no doubt that Jiang Shangyu and even Gu Xingyun, who were more ambitious, would be out of control. In such a sensitive situation, facing several top experts in the dark world, even Li Huaqing had to carefully control them. They were undoubtedly godly weapons that could shock the world, but if one did not control the godly weapons well, they would be the first to be decapitated. Li Tianlan wanted to stay here. Li Guangtu wanted to save him. Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun also had to stay. This was Li Huaqing's bottom line. Once the balance formed by these people was out of control, it might be the beginning of the decline of Zhongzhou State's national power. The delicate relationship between Zhongzhou State and Emperor Dong's palace was no secret now. This was something that could not be hidden at all. With the announcement of the divine list, there must have been a lot of people secretly ready to take action, ready to find a suitable time to extend an olive branch to Li Tianlan. What should Li Huaqing do? In the long silence, Li Huaqing stood up from the smoky office. Do what you should do. That was his answer. He walked out of the office. Ma Si, who had already gone to work and was sorting out the materials, stood up immediately. Li Huaqing did not give Ma Si a chance to speak. He waved his hand and ordered in a low voice, "Get ready. We'll go to Tiannan now." Chapter 1204. Light was the purest color. The faintly discernible light shone in wisps, dancing in the bedroom as if it were alive. It spread, decomposed, and finally turned into tiny imperceptible light particles. The light particles touched the ubiquitous sword energy around them. Li Tianlan could clearly feel the faint vitality contained in the light particles. Xianyuan Wushang stood beside him. The light radiated from his palm. His face was flushed with anger, embarrassment, and a hint of embarrassment. The light particles slowly integrated into Li Guangtu's body, who was in a coma. Li Guangtu's aura gradually stabilized at a very slow speed, and then began to strengthen little by little. There was no medicine, no equipment, and no assistance. Xianyuan Wushang stood in front of Li Guangtu, and there was only the pure light constantly radiating from his palm. Li Tianlan watched this scene quietly, slightly narrowing his eyes. Xianyuan Wushang had saved people twice. The first time was to save Wang Yuexianga, and the second time was to save Xiao Mahai, the major domo of Emperor Dong's palace. But this was the first time Li Tianlan saw him make a move. Saint, who was lucky enough to see Xianyuan Wushang's treatment process, had roughly described the scene at that time, and accurately summarized it in 8 words. The holy light was wanton and surging. Xianyuan Wushang was a doctor, but it was definitely not a conventional way for him to save people. The light rippled, and it could even be said to be a special ability. Li Tianlan didn't know whether there was such a thing as a special ability in this world. The wisps of light that bloomed from Xianyuan Wushang's hand were barely within his understanding. If he thought about it carefully, the dragon vein of Zhongzhou state in his body seemed to have a similar effect as the light in Xianyuan Wushang's hand. They were both pure and rich vitality. But the dragon vein could only work on him. And Xianyuan Wushang had mastered this vitality. Therefore, he could be said to be the most brilliant doctor in this era. But the holy light was overflowing and surging. Li Tianlan frowned and looked at the dim light particles in the air that seemed to disappear at any time. The light particles barely formed light spots when they gathered, and then quickly dimmed. No matter how low the standard was, the scene in front of him didn't seem to be surging. Li Tianlan watched Xianyuan Wushang toss and turn with an embarrassed face for nearly half an hour. Li Guangtu's aura was indeed increasing. However, he was still in a comatose state. This was completely different from what the saint had reported. Ji-song of the healing moon 40 seconds. It took less than half a minute to heal Xiao Mahai. The treatment for Li Guangtu had been going on for 30 minutes, but it still didn't seem to be working. Li Tianlan knew about Li Guangtu's injury. Strictly speaking, his injury was much more serious than Xiao Mahai's and Mochizuki's at that time, but Li Guangtu's physical strength was also far stronger than Mochizuki's and Xiao Mahai's. After all, Li Tianlan didn't want to kill Li Guangtu. When he made a move, he didn't go too far and even took into account the internal injury of Li Guangtu. Jiang Shangyu obviously knew this, so he had no choice but to let Li Guangtu stay. If it were him or Gu Xingyan instead of Li Guangtu, the moment Li Tianlan made a move, one of them would definitely die. Therefore, if they were in the same physical strength, there was no reason for Li Guangtu's injury to be more serious than Xiao Mahai's. Li Tianlan frowned and suddenly said calmly, "Just heal him. It doesn't matter even if you let him return to his peak state. Don't worry about anything." His voice was very light, but it contained extreme calmness and confidence. Xianyuan Wushang's mouth twitched, and he became more and more embarrassed. Of course, he knew that he didn't have to worry about anything. Even if he did, it was not Li Guangtu. With Li Tianlan's current level, even if Li Guangtu was in his peak state, what threat could he pose? But in fact, although he was a little embarrassed to say it, he twitched the corner of his mouth and finally said, "I've tried my best." Yes, this was a situation that even Xianyuan Wushang himself didn't expect. He had tried his best, but it still ended up like this. He knew that the real environment had resealed the earth, and he could feel it, but he didn't expect that it would be sealed to this extent. Compared with before the seal, the strength of the real environment now was more than 100 times stronger. This directly led to a crazy decline in Xianyuan Wushang's healing ability. Now he could still be said to be the top doctor, and even could be said to be the best, but it was difficult for him to create miracles. In the real environment, there were no miracles. Countless rays of light drifted in the bedroom. After another half an hour, Li Guangtu still didn't wake up. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and glanced at Xianyuan Wushang. Xianyuan Wushang stopped and seemed to observe Li Guangtu. He nodded and said, "There's no problem, but he probably still needs to rest so he won't wake up for the time being." "How long?" Li Tianlan asked in a flat voice. "About 12 hours. Xianyuan Wushang answered after thinking for a while. "Let's go and eat something." Li Tianlan's figure flickered. He didn't stay in the bedroom. There was no need to leave any protective measures behind. His sword energy had completely covered every corner of Emperor Dong's palace. Within the scope of his sword energy, every grass, every tree, and even every trace of air in Emperor Dong's palace turned into peerless sword light in an instant. Wherever the sword energy passed, it became Li Tianlan's home field. Xianyuan Wushang followed Li Tianlan, narrowing his eyes and observing silently. In this state, Li Tianlan moved very slowly, but everyone could be sure that Li Tianlan wasn't walking. His whole body was like a bad signal, appearing and disappearing from time to time, bringing an extremely unreal but absolutely real feeling. Every wisp of sword energy that swept through Emperor Dong's palace became a part of his body. He kept changing positions with the sword energy. In a sense, this was a kind of sharpening and practice for his swordsmanship. Every wisp of sword energy that swept through the field was him, but also not him. None of them were him. Xianyuan Wushang frowned. Brother. This title naturally came out of his mouth. Li Tianlan also responded naturally. Where is your real body? Xianyuan Wushang's tone was a little complicated. Li Tianlan fell silent. He was silent for a long time. His figure flickered lightly in front of Xianyuan Wushang. Li Tianlan, who could flash without walking, didn't say softly until he was out of the castle. Now I should be my real body. Should be? Xianyuan Wushang suddenly felt a little cold all over. It doesn't matter. Li Tianlan shook his head. Xianyuan Wushang thought that if this wasn't important, what else was important? He had reached such a high level in swordsmanship that he wasn't even sure whether he was his real body or not. Can you walk now? Xianyuan Wushang smiled a little reluctantly, with a sense of testing. Yes. Li Tianlan nodded. But compared to walking, it saves more energy and is more focused. Xianyuan Wushang seemed to understand something, but also seemed to have a lot of things he didn't understand. He shook his head slightly and sighed. What's wrong? Li Tianlan glanced at him. Nothing. Xianyuan Wushang smiled and said softly, I'm just thinking that in your current state, compared with Xianyuan Feng, who is also in his heyday with full energy. He paused and looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. Between you and it, who is the sharpest sword in the dark world? Chapter 1205. Li Tianlan smiled casually, and did not answer Xianyuan Wushang's seemingly inexplicable question. He just said, Are you sure you only want a small clinic? Xianyuan Wushang stared blankly for a moment, then smiled. Of course, that suits me very well. Both Xianyuan Wushang and Xing Tian would join Emperor Dong's palace, which had been decided from the day they appeared. At that time, Emperor Dong's palace wasn't sure about Xianyuan Wushang's ability, so it didn't assign him any duties. After treating Xiao Mahai and Mochizuki-song, Xianyuan Wushang showed his ability, but the death of Chen Fangqing and other things messed up the situation. Although the situation was still turbulent, the internal situation of Emperor Dong's palace had stabilized. Li Tianlan naturally did not intend to let him be an idler. Go lead the biology lab. The controllable energy in Xianyuan Wushang was the purest vitality. If Xianyuan Wushang joined the biological laboratory of Emperor Dong's palace, even if he knew nothing, he could improve the efficacy of the gene medicine that Emperor Dong's palace was developing by several levels with this energy alone. The clinic is good. I think it's the most suitable for me. Xianyuan Wushang shook his head without hesitation and said with a smile, I'm best at treating headaches, fever, colds, fever, and diarrhea. I'm really tired of looking at all the data, parameters, graphs, and combinations in the laboratory. As for the biological laboratory, I can roughly provide you with some formulas, but not much. It's probably going to be difficult to gather the materials, but that's about it. Xianyuan Wushang was now a holy disciple. The starting point for a holy disciple was level 1. There was a name that made Xianyuan Wushang feel a little helpless. Nurse. In the current medical field he was definitely an expert. Even the saint beside Lin Shi could not compare to him. However, under the current circumstances he could not be of much help. He could naturally lead and play a role in the work of the biological laboratory. In fact, whether it was the biological laboratory headed by Nalin Shuring in Emperor Dong's palace, or the biological laboratory of the Wang family of Beihai that was unrivaled in the world, Xianyuan Wushang had experienced a long, long time ago. In theory, some of the topics that Nalin Shuring was tackling, the various aspects of ideas, and the bottlenecks that she had encountered, were not a problem in Xianyuan Wushang's eyes. It was just like how most adults wouldn't be troubled by the question of 1 + 1. But the problem was that even if one knew the exact answer, if one's eyes couldn't see, Ears couldn't hear, mouth couldn't speak, and hands couldn't move, he wouldn't be able to tell others the exact answer. Xianyuan Wushang wasn't blind or mute, but there were some things he couldn't do anything about. He knew what Nalan Shuriying and the Wang family of Beihai were attacking now. Here, it should be called the Eternal Third Generation. This was something developed by the War God Realm and the Human Emperor Palace when they first rose to power. Now it was called the Dew of Life in those two forces. Anything that could increase one's vitality wouldn't be cheap anywhere, but the Dew of Life wasn't that rare either. At the very least, the War God Realm and the Human Emperor Palace, which consisted of hundreds of millions of human soldiers, regardless of whether they were elites or ordinary soldiers, would have a few bottles. As for the potions of the Life series, they were no longer named after generations, nor were they some sort of breakthrough improvement. The Dew of Life, the Blood of Life, the Torrent of Life, the Spring of Life, across lakes, rivers, oceans, and even the last treasure of the War God Realm, the Real Immortality Potion. Each potion was countless times better. It was the Real Immortality Potion that helped Li Tianlan directly enter the Invincible Realm from a seriously injured state. Even if it was absolutely suppressed by the real environment, it still played an incredible role. Judging from Xianyuan Wushang's real level, in theory, it wasn't difficult for him to make the Ocean of Life potion. In theory, that was to say from a purely technical point of view. The problem was that there were no corresponding materials, let alone sophisticated equipment. The apostles around Lin Shi could make the equipment, but no one could do anything about the materials. If Qin Weibai completely returned to her peak state, she might be able to do it, but it was obviously impossible. Xianyuan Wushang could provide Emperor East with several gene potion formulas that could be made in the current environment. If he said anything more, not to mention whether he could do it, even if he could, it would go against his original intention as a guide. What about Xing Tian? Li Tianlan asked. In the final battle in North Sea, Xianyuan Wushang and Xing Tian were in East Island. Compared with the low-key but mysterious Xianyuan Wushang, Xing Tian had a record of fighting. The only superior of the invincible realm that the sanctuary had cultivated for more than 2 years died in Xing Tian's hands. What was more tragic was that Li Tianlan still didn't know the name of the invincible realm expert, nor did the whole dark world. He said he wanted to be a PE teacher. Xianyuan Wushang looked at Li Tianlan and whispered, "There is no school in Emperor East Palace now." Li Tianlan was expressionless, and his voice was a little cold. There was a school in Xianyuan City now, and Ning Qianqing also ambitiously proposed a plan to build Tiannan University, but it was still far away. He couldn't just casually arrange Xing Tian to be a PE teacher in an ordinary school, could he? You don't want to contribute to Xianyuan City. Li Tianlan said lightly, "We have no choice." Xianyuan Wushang thought for a while and said seriously, "We can help, such as treating the injuries of Moongaze and Song. But we can help. It's difficult for me to do anything else. Our task is not to interfere with the development of Emperor East Palace. At least at this stage, Xing Tian and I can only be onlookers in Emperor East Palace." "Why?" Li Tianlan's eyes were cold. Xianyuan Wushang frowned and whispered, "Because the rise of Emperor East Palace must be real. Absolutely real." His voice seemed to be subconsciously heavier when he said the last few words. After a pause, Xianyuan Wushang continued with a smile. "Similarly, this is also my father's order." "Your father?" Li Tianlan nodded, as if he was thinking about the importance of the other party. He had a son like Xianyuan Wushang, and even a servant like Xing Tian? The importance of the other party was self-evident. But was there really such a person? If there was, where was he? "He's not as powerful as you think." Xianyuan Wushang smiled and said, "At least here, if my father fought with you, he probably wouldn't be a match for you." He was referring to the current Li Tianlan, and the energetic ruthless. Although he didn't say it explicitly, it was not wrong to say it that way. He's been friends with you for a long time, and he really hopes to meet you at the right time. Xianyuan Wushang continued, "He knows me." Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. "We've been friends with each other for a long time." Xianyuan Wushang said, "I'm curious about what kind of person he is." Li Tianlan laughed. Xianyuan Wushang hesitated and whispered, I'm not qualified to comment on my father. I think he's a great man, but he doesn't think so of himself. Li Tianlan looked back at him with interest. How does he comment on himself? An unqualified guardian. An idiot. Li Tianlan looked at Xianyuan Wushang with a stiff expression. He had never met Xianyuan Wushang's father, but he knew that he was an unfathomable figure. To comment on himself as an idiot, he was indeed unfathomable. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched, and he suddenly said, "What about me? What does your father think of me?" Xianyuan Wushang glanced at Li Tianlan weakly. His voice was even lower, as low as a mosquito's hum. Big idiot. Chapter 1206. Xianyuan Wushang's father's evaluation of Li Tianlan, which seemed a little shocking now. Seeing that Li Tianlan didn't get angry, Xianyuan Wushang told him the whole evaluation. A qualified guardian, an unqualified shaper, a big idiot. This was the evaluation of Li Tianlan from the great emperor whom he had never met. Li Tianlan smiled faintly. He was really not angry. He was just a little curious about the person who called him a big idiot, and even thought he was an idiot. After saying that he was looking forward to meeting him, they went to the dining hall of Emperor Dong's palace and ordered some food. Xianyuan Wushang gobbled up the food to replenish his energy. Li Tianlan casually fiddled with the rice in front of him, a little lost in thought. "By the way, brother, I just found a problem and forgot to tell you." Xianyuan Wushang took a sip of Coke and sighed comfortably. This young fat man with a beer belly didn't like drinking. At first, he liked to carry a bucket of purified water and take a few sips from time to time. But this habit didn't last long, and he began to crazily like Coke, Fanta, Sprite, and other messy drinks. So far, it was said that Xianyuan Wushang's highest record was 12 bottles a day, 1-liter bottles. It was said that Xianyuan Wushang didn't drink water anymore. Whether in Yuzhou or Emperor Dong's palace, all he drank was Coke. Such brave deeds made Li Tianlan's scalp numb. He once reminded Xianyuan Wushang to be careful not to drink himself to death. Xianyuan Wushang smiled and said he was not afraid because he was a doctor. Li Tianlan quietly thought that maybe soon he would find a small clinic in Emperor Dong's palace that had more Coke bottles than all kinds of medicine. Maybe it would develop into a hospital in the future. His eyes wandered and fell on Xianyuan Wushang's face. "What's the matter?" "There's something wrong with Li Guangtu's body." Xianyuan Wushang thought and hesitated, as if he didn't know how to explain in detail. Finally, he shook his head. "I've studied his martial arts. Perhaps in the dark world, this unique skill was not as famous as the Sword of 6 Paths of Reincarnation and the 24 Moves of Sword, but in a sense, the immortality seal was derived from the 24 moves of sword. To be exact, it was derived from the 24 moves of sword and the Sword of 6 Paths of Reincarnation. It takes into account most of the advantages of the 6 Paths of Reincarnation sword and the 24 moves of sword, but it also inherits the shortcomings of the two unique skills. The reason why Li Guangtu was able to reach his current level after his martial arts foundation was shattered is not only because of his amazing talent, but also because of the unique way of exerting power of the immortal seal. You should know this very well. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and nodded. The immortality seal derived from the 24 moves of swordsmanship was not difficult for Li Tianlan at the moment. The way this unique skill exerted force was indeed extremely strange. However, under normal circumstances, the combination of the three would be the complete sword, and it would also be the most realistic sword. On the other hand, the foundation of the undying seal was nothingness. This feeling was hard to explain in detail. To be exact, Li Guangtu was not in the invincible realm. It could even be said that he had no realm. After his martial arts foundation was shattered, it had never been repaired. To some extent, the immortality seal was beyond the scope of the sword energy and the sword intent. It could even be said to be the destructive power that erupted from the spirit and will. This was pure nothingness. Because it was not real, it was ever-changing and everywhere. All the destructive power of the immortality seal, and all the sword energy of Li Guangtu could be regarded as the eruption of the spiritual power. He came to this day from a state where his martial arts were completely crippled. He used the experience of the past, which was illusory. When this illusory experience acted on his spirit and will, his spiritual power exploded with power similar to the four realms of martial arts. For example, the storm, the ice, the raging fire, the thunderbolt, and even the sword light of the invincible realm. Almost all the exertion of the immortality seal focused on the spiritual domain. Therefore, even if Li Kuangtu was seriously injured, he still had a strong combat capability. As long as he was energetic and determined, the combat capability he could exert was almost unimaginable. Because his unique skill consumed not physical strength but spirit. I don't like this unique skill, Xianyuan Wushang said blandly, but it's very interesting. I heard that Senior Li used to be a world-famous master in the spiritual domain in the dark world. Although he didn't reach the so-called transcendent realm, he was infinitely close to this domain. So it should be normal for Li Kuangtu to have some research in this field. The immortality seal is not hypnosis. Li Tianlan frowned. Of course not. Xianyuan Wushang smiled. The word hypnosis is very vivid. The immortality seal has nothing to do with hypnosis. This unique skill, to some extent, combines the sword energy of the 24 moves of sword, but it uses the explosive power of the 6 paths of reincarnation, sword of the Wang family of Beihai. This is the core. Li Kuangtu's spiritual outburst evolved into sword energy. Under that level of outburst, hypnosis becomes a very powerless thing. It can't be done, and there is no need to do it. A person who can resist that level of spiritual outburst is not hypnotized by that level of spiritual power. So what you mean is? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. Spiritual power is a very magical thing. Xianyuan Wushang said softly, Big brother, your swordsmanship pursues reality and illusion. Then let me ask you a question. Do you know what the end of illusion is? It's reality, Li Tianlan said blandly. An answer full of the charm of order, and absolutely accurate. Xianyuan Wushang's eyes lit up. Have you ever thought about sister-in-law? He suddenly paused, shook his head subconsciously, and changed the topic. Let's give an example. For example, the old man in the Holy Land. His spiritual power is in the so-called transcendent realm, and it is very stable. But the extent of his spiritual outburst is very poor, so he can only hypnotize the enemy, and it is more than enough to protect himself. Under such circumstances, I'm almost sure that even if you go to kill him, it will be difficult to succeed. But Li Kuangtu is different. His spiritual power is not as strong as that of the old man in the Holy Land, but it is full of explosive power. He doesn't know how to use these things gently, so every time it erupts, it is uncontrollable, so he can't hypnotize others. The instantaneous eruption brings the most powerful lethality. You mean that spiritual power is illusory, but the end of illusion is reality, so Li Kuangtu's spiritual power has reached the level where he can turn illusion into reality. He is far from it. Xianyuan Wushang twitched the corner of his mouth disdainfully. He only uses the explosive power of the 6 paths of reincarnation. For a short moment his spiritual power can become close to reality, so there is the current sword energy and sword light. These things have lethality, but they can only exist for a moment. How can they be real? He took a deep look at Li Tianlan and said softly, What is real should be eternal. Li Tianlan looked at him thoughtfully. What are you trying to say? It's still about spiritual power. Xianyuan Wushang lowered his head and took a big gulp of coke. Although there is a threshold for spiritual power at this stage, the threshold is very small compared to martial arts. Li Kuangtu can't make any progress in martial arts. To be exact, he is actually a useless person. All his combat power is concentrated in spiritual power. If I'm not wrong, Li Kuangtu's spiritual power should be very close to that of that old man in the Holy Land. Once he breaks through, Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed tightly. So, Xianyuan Wushang smiled. Now it seems that the biggest threat to you is Wang Shengshao, who is integrating Wang Tianzong's sword energy. In fact, the biggest threat to you is Li Kuangtu, but he doesn't know it himself. Chapter 1207. There was no need for Xianyuan Wushang to explain anything. Li Tianlan had already understood what he meant and knew what he had overlooked before. He was very familiar with the Undying Seal. In fact, he couldn't be more familiar with it. He knew every move of the immortality seal, including the comprehensive move, like the back of his hand. Or it could be said that his fire was pure. He didn't steal from Li Kuangtu. This unique skill itself was a branch of martial arts derived from the 24 moves of sword. He completely understood the 24 moves of sword, so he naturally understood the immortality seal. Therefore, Li Tianlong could also use the immortality seal, and it often worked wonders. Even in the same realm, the immortality seal in his hands was different from Li Kuangtu's. The difference was not in anything else, but in terms of destructive power. Every move of the immortality seal in Li Tianlong's hands was more fierce and majestic than Li Kuangtu's. But compared with Li Kuangtu, he always lacked a trace of smoothness and freedom. Li Tianlong always thought that this was the problem, that his study of the 24 moves of sword was not thorough enough. In terms of overall understanding of the 24 moves of sword, he might be able to surpass Li Kuangtu in all aspects, but a different understanding of a certain sword could cause this situation. He knew that his essence was pointed out by Xianyuan Wushang, the fifth on the divine list. Li Kuangtu, whose combat capability had obviously surpassed the peak of the invincible realm, was still a useless man in essence. Li Tianlong could vaguely feel that Li Kuangtu's body was a little strange, but he never thought that it would be such a result. Li Kuangtu was not in the invincible realm. He didn't even have a realm. In the War of Treason, his destroyed martial arts foundation had never been repaired at all. The so-called immortality seal could reshape the foundation, was alive from the beginning. His body was nourished by a large amount of vitality, so that the strength of his body returned to the peak state. As for the foundation, he never thought about it at all. Every move of the immortality seal that could destroy heaven and earth was essentially the power of the spiritual domain. The power of the mind was naturally more unpredictable and strange, but it was also naturally more mellow and free. Li Tianlong deeply mastered the 24 moves of sword, but he knew little about the 6 paths of reincarnation. He could copy Wang Shengxiao's 6 paths of reincarnation, but he could only copy it, not master it. In other words, if he fought with Wang Shengxiao and Wang Shengxiao didn't use the 6 paths of reincarnation, he naturally couldn't use it either. But Li Kuangtu knew the 24 moves of sword and the 6 paths of reincarnation. The essence of martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai was outburst. He combined this kind of essence with the 24 moves of sword and applied it to the spiritual field. From the outbreak of physical strength to the outbreak of spiritual strength, it was more natural, faster, and more bizarre. This was the true state of Li Kuangtu. There is no doubt that Li Kuangtu is a true genius. There is no doubt about that. There was undisguised admiration in Xianyuan Wushang's voice. From his point of view, the combination of the 24 moves of sword and the 6 paths of reincarnation, and the transfer from physical strength to spiritual strength was unimaginable. It could even be said that it was an almost coincidental result of the concentrated inspiration of absolute genius. For Li Tianlong, the significance of this matter was that Li Kuangtu had changed his fighting style. But how could it be so simple? From the perspective of the space-time corridor, this matter was completely equivalent to Li Kuangtu transferring his own authority. He had been transferred from the authority of a martial artist to the authority of the lawful camp. He had inadvertently touched the rules of the world, and finally walked on the path represented by Qin Weibai. What did this mean? If this matter was spread back, the entire space-time corridor would be in an uproar. Perhaps Li Kuangtu's strength was nothing, but his success in the transfer of authority meant that the human clan could be more flexible under the starry sky in the future. And it also meant that the authority of neutrality was further expanded. He treated Li Kuangtu and controlled his physical data, so it would take him a long time to write the report to the space-time corridor. So, you mean that Li Kuangtu will break through soon? Li Tianlong's eyes flickered slightly. Maybe it will be faster than you can imagine. Xianyuan Wushang smiled softly. In fact, I think that if he hadn't been in a state of injury in recent years, he might have succeeded in breaking through now. Big brother, you know what this means. Of course, Li Tianlong knew what it meant. Once Li Kuangtu entered the transcendent realm in the spiritual field, it was equivalent to him entering the supreme realm from another perspective. The old man in the Holy Land was the best example. In the spiritual field, the old man in the Holy Land was supreme. That kind of spiritual power could completely affect the current Li Tianlan. That old man without any martial arts might be the only person Li Tianlan couldn't kill now. And Li Guangtu was different from that old man. His spiritual power was huge, but he didn't know how to use it conventionally at present. So Li Guangtu didn't know hypnosis, but he knew what the old man in the Holy Land didn't know. The outburst of spiritual power. Even Li Tianlan felt it a little incredible when he thought about it, and he had to sigh at Li Guangtu's genius. He mastered the essence of the outburst of the 6 paths of reincarnation sword, and turned the outburst of physical strength into the outburst of spiritual power. If Li Guangtu entered the transcendent realm in the spiritual field, his comprehensive combat capability would definitely not be weaker than that of Wang Tianzong when he was in Mormons. The destructive power might be a little weaker, but it was more unpredictable and impossible to guard against. A heavenly son who turned the spiritual power into martial arts. Li Tianlan was very confident, but he also knew very well that he was indeed invincible now. But if he fought against Wang Tianzong when he was in Mormons, unless the ruthless energy was at its peak, he had less than a 30% chance of winning against Wang Tianzong at that time. Well, to be precise, the chance of winning was almost equal to 0. But now, according to Xianyuan Wushang, Li Guangtu seemed to have reached the point where he could break through at any time. The premise was that his injury was healed. He really gave me a surprise. Li Tianlan suddenly laughed and whispered to himself. Why him? Xianyuan Wushang didn't say a word, bowing his head and gulping. Li Tianlan took out a cigarette and lit it, saying calmly, "What do you think?" "I can't give any opinion." Xianyuan Wushang smiled innocently. "I just give the result. As for how to decide, it's all up to you. Kill him or let him go. Big brother, if you want to kill him, you have to be quick. Don't give face to anyone. His threat is beyond imagination. If you decide to let him go, then you have to ask Zhongzhou State to give you a good price." The melodious ringtone of the phone rang as soon as Xianyuan Wushang's voice fell. Li Tianlan took out his mobile phone and looked at the number. His eyes slightly narrowed, and then he picked it up and called the minister with a smile. Dongqing Wudi's slow but still steady voice sounded on the other end of the phone. "Tianlan, I'm coming to Emperor Dong's palace right now." Chapter 1208. Before the helicopter landed, Dongqing Wudi could clearly feel the almost boiling atmosphere in Emperor Dong's palace. He came quickly, and the news from the dark world was one step faster. The new ranking list on the divine list caused a sensation in the dark world when Dongqing Wudi just entered the sky over Xianyuan City. When the helicopter landed on the tarmac of Emperor Dong's palace, it was greeted by the almost fanatical noise in every corner of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan stood quietly on the lawn and looked at Dongqing Wudi, who came out, with a smile on his face. "Tianlan, congratulations." Dongqing Wudi laughed. The relief that had been suppressed for many years was being released from his soul little by little. At this moment, he seemed to be much younger. The youngest one on the divine list. At least the next half a century is your time. Dongqing Wudi held Li Tianlan's hand tightly and sighed with emotion. "Now those who are standing against us, I'm afraid they won't even be able to sleep well. The current Emperor Dong's palace deserves all this." Li Tianlan chuckled softly, looking relaxed. The ranking of the divine list was a storm for the dark world. For countries in the world, it was a comparison of strength in some aspects. On different occasions, the list had different meanings. But for the parties involved, what was the significance of the list? At least for Li Tianlan, it was meaningless. He had always believed that he was invincible. It didn't matter whether he was ranked first or last, or even not on the list. His opponents would not surrender without a fight just because he was the first on the divine list, nor would they despise him because he was not on the divine list. No matter how the list was arranged, it didn't mean much to Emperor Dong's palace. What Li Tianlan wanted to do or didn't want to do would not change because of the list. The only effect might be to raise the morale a little. "You're the one who deserves all of this." Dongqing Wudi patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder. "Oh." Li Tianlan followed Dongqing Wudi and said in a calm tone, What do you think of Emperor Dong's palace, Minister? I don't have any opinion, but it's a suggestion. Dongqing Wudi looked around and said, now Emperor Dong's palace has the strength, but the development time is short, and the interior is still a little chaotic. This is a common problem for any new force, but any new force is not when it was first established. It was far more cohesive than the other forces. Do you know why? He didn't wait for Li Tianlan's answer and said directly, because any new force has a clear goal at the beginning of its establishment. It has a clear goal, but there is no huge benefit for the time being. So everyone inside is struggling and wants to conquer everything outside. It was the same for Emperor Dong's palace in the beginning, but things are different now. It will be solved. Li Tianlan nodded. He agreed with Dongqing Wudi's view. In fact, not only Dongqing Wudi, but many people who had a deep understanding of the development process of Emperor Dong's palace had the same concern. Emperor Dong's palace was indeed a new power, and its internal cohesion was still there. But what was different from other new powers was that the interests within Emperor Dong's palace were enough to destroy anyone's rationality. Huge interests formed a chain of interests, which became more and more obvious inside Emperor Dong's palace. And it was certain that as Li Tianlan climbed to the top of the divine list, Emperor Dong's palace would absorb more and more interests in the future. Under such circumstances, an organization whose internal duties were not very clear was bound to have great hidden dangers. Perhaps because of Li Tianlan's existence, Emperor Dong's palace would not fall apart. But if Emperor Dong's palace fell into a quagmire of internal strife, it would undoubtedly be no good for its future development. They were the first group of people who followed Li Tianlan to conquer the country. Li Tianlan couldn't even deal with them seriously. Beitian and the people of Sai City are not right, are they? Dongqing Wudi asked calmly. As the focus of the whole dark world, Emperor Dong's palace had no secrets to some extent. Maybe there were many things that the dark world couldn't see clearly. But after Emperor Dong's palace merged with some forces of Mount Shu, the Flourishing Age Fund, and Sai City, after several meetings, everyone could feel the subtle relationship between Li Beitian and Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud of Sai City. The parliament of Zhongzhou State could naturally get the news. He's too sensitive. But at present, they are not at odds, but we do need to pay attention to it. Li Tianlan said softly. Do you know the reason? Dongqing Wudi smiled. It's not a secret. Li Tianlan also smiled, but he felt a little helpless. Li Beitian and Sai City. To be exact, the relationship between Mount Shu and Sai City had never been harmonious. Li Beitian and Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud were in a tit-for-tat relationship. And there was also a knot between Saint and Situ Tsangyue. The reason was well known. Yun Qinshi, the Phantom Sword Master, one of the 4 sword masters of Mount Shu, Situ Tsangyue, the hidden god of Zhongzhou State, and Li Shi, the current palace master of Emperor Dong's palace, had been passed down to this day. These 3 women could be said to be absolutely incompatible rivals in love. It sounded melodramatic, but it was the truth. After Li Guangtu failed at the border, he lost contact with the 3 of them. Li Shi became the wife of the governor of Kunlun City. Situ Tsangyue went to Mount Taibai, and Yun Qinshi still stayed in Mount Shu. As Li Shi quieted down, Situ Tsangyue, who later established Sai City, was directly targeted by Yun Qinshi. The contradiction between Mount Shu and Sai City had lasted for many years. This kind of contradiction, after Emperor Dong's palace absorbed Nirvana Sword and Great Void Sword of Mount Shu and Sai City, was directly brought to the inside of Emperor Dong's palace. However, after all, it was just a contradiction, not a hatred. So both sides behaved very restrained. Today's subtle relationship was just a long-accumulated unpleasantness, and they couldn't get over it for the time being. It was impossible for Li Beitian and Saint to fight with Sai City for Yun Qinshi. After all, now they were on the same side. And Yun Qinshi, as Li Guangtu's former woman, this Phantom Sword Master, who had followed Li Tianlan's Snow Dance Corps to fight in Snow Country, was an expert of the half-step invincible realm. Shortly after Li Guangtu's identity was exposed 2 years ago, she had joined the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Of the former 4 sword masters of Mount Shu, only Han Chongyang, the Yin and Yang sword master, was still in Mount Shu. Emperor Dong's palace will enter a period of rapid expansion next. I also intend to take advantage of this time to stabilize the internal structure of Emperor Dong's palace. This matter is already being done. Minister, rest assured, everything is still under control. Li Tianlan said lightly. I have nothing to worry about. Dongqing Wudi shook his head. It's just a necessary reminder. Li Tianlan said. Minister, did you come here today for this? This was definitely a question that he knew the answer to. Dongqing Wudi smiled bitterly and said softly, How is Li Kuangtu? Chapter 1209. Dongqing Wudi's voice echoed in the night, a little bitter, a little difficult, and a little dignified. What happened to Li Kuangtu now? The whole Zhongzhou state was very concerned about this issue. The news they got was that Li Kuangtu fell into Li Tianlan's hands. As for what happened after that, all the news was cut off. Why did Dongqing Wudi come here in such a hurry? It could be said that he knew that the list of the divine list would be released in the near future, but the most important thing was to determine Li Kuangtu's state. Li Tianlan left a lot of memorable impressions in the dark world, all kinds of impressions. But no matter what kind of impressions they were, they had nothing to do with being good-tempered and easygoing. Radical, strong, crazy, indifferent, cruel, decisive, straightforward, and impulsive. He was in his early 20s, an age where no one would be surprised by what he did. Li Kuangtu fell into Li Tianlan's hands. If they didn't agree with each other, it was entirely possible for Li Tianlan to kill him directly, and the possibility was not small. Dongqing Wudi never thought that Li Tianlan was a fool. Even if Li Tianlan couldn't see the current situation clearly, military counselor, Saint Situ Songyue, and even Li Shi, as well as the old people of the Li family in Emperor Dong's palace, were enough to serve as the think tanks of Emperor Dong's palace. If Li Tianlan didn't pay attention to it, they would pay attention to it and tell Li Tianlan. So Li Tianlan must now know the importance of Li Kuangtu. This was also what made Dongqing Wudi most nervous. In his mind, Li Tianlan's answer was very important. If Li Tianlan killed Li Kuangtu before he came, there would be no need to say anything. On the contrary, if Li Kuangtu was still alive at this time, it meant that Li Tianlan was also waiting for the conditions of Zhongzhou state. At least it meant that this matter could be discussed, and it could be a happy ending. What Zhongzhou state needed was a living Li Kuangtu. If Li Tianlan killed him directly, Dongqing Wudi was not sure whether Zhongzhou state would fall out with Li Tianlan for a dead man. But if it really happened, there would be a lot of trouble. Li Tianlan glanced at Dongqing Wudi, and then laughed coldly. He's not dead yet. He's in a coma, and he's badly injured. Dongqing Wudi let out a long breath without concealing it and whispered, You don't want to kill him? Li Tianlan said calmly. You don't want me to kill him? Dongqing Wudi silently took out a cigarette, and handed it to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan took out a lighter and lit it for him. The two stood under the night sky of Tiannan and smoked. Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath. To be precise, it's the parliament that doesn't want you to kill him. Li Huaqing's intentions. Li Tianlan said blandly. It was not a question, but an affirmative statement. His voice was very calm, but just a simple address seemed to cause the surrounding temperature to drop. Dongqing Wudi's smoking hand stiffened for a moment. Before he could speak, Li Tianlan had already laughed. There seemed to be countless long swords in the sky and earth of Emperor Dong's palace, and the overwhelming sword energy was moving slowly. Li Tianlan's voice was a little cold. He said he would give me an explanation about Gu Xingyun, so I didn't make a fuss and waited for him to give me an explanation. But now he didn't give me the explanation he wanted to give me. Instead, he wanted to intervene in the internal affairs of the Li family? Minister, do you think that if I take a step back, the parliament will think that I'm easy to bully? If I take a step back, the parliament will think that Emperor Dong's palace is a group of bloodless cowards? The night slowly twisted, and the majestic sword energy suddenly covered the starry sky. A huge vortex with a diameter of tens of thousands of meters formed over the entire Xinyuan city in an instant. Li Tianlan's voice was low. What should I do to make the parliament understand what the real Emperor Dong's palace is? Tianlan. Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath and reached out to press Li Tianlan's shoulder. Li Tianlan did not move. The vortex of sword energy in the sky began to disappear as his mood eased, but Xianyuan City under the night sky was bitterly cold. Dongqing Wudi frowned. He found that he seemed to have misunderstood Li Tianlan's meaning. Originally, he thought that there would only be two results when he came here. The first was that Li Guangtu had been killed, and the second was that Li Guangtu was alive, which meant that Li Tianlan was also ready to negotiate. But now it seemed that it was not the case at all. He sighed and said slowly, "What are you going to do about Li Guangtu?" "You won't die," Li Tianlan said faintly. "I won't kill him for Grandpa or for Rushi. But there is always a price to pay for doing something wrong. When he wakes up, I will talk to him. If he can realize his mistake, it will be the best. If he doesn't know his mistake, I will find a place to let him calm down and reflect on it slowly until he figures it out." "Do you want to imprison him?" Dongqing Wudi's face changed slightly. Li Tianlan did not speak, but looked at Dongqing Wudi quietly. Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State needs the power of the purgatory of heaven capital. Dongqing Wudi hesitated. What Li Huaqing needs is checks and balances. The power of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan corrected Dongqing Wudi's statement. The purgatory of heaven capital is a part of the Li family, and the Li family is mine. This is my Li family. Isn't it ridiculous that he wants to use my things to check and balance me and even stop me? What are you going to do? Dongqing Wudi was silent for a long time, and then he sighed deeply. What's your attitude, minister? Li Tianlan asked suddenly. He stopped where he was and looked at Dongqing Wudi silently. Dongqing Wudi also stopped and looked at Li Tianlan quietly. There was no dissatisfaction, no sharpness, no hostility in Li Tianlan's eyes, and they were not so deep and unpredictable. He just looked at Dongqing Wudi silently, and his eyes were even a little dull, without any emotion. Dongqing Wudi's heart twitched fiercely. At this moment he stood very close to his son, but the gap in their thinking was very far. The parliament is very sincere. Dongqing Wudi said in a low voice. The president is willing to do his best to help the new group rise. After Nanyue, he is willing to give Beijiang to the new group. At present, although the new group does not have enough cutting-edge power, if it is willing to talk, it may be possible to make an exception and promote one. And you know very well what Beijiang means. I can also tell you that this is not all. As long as you are willing to talk, the new group will get more, and even the border control corps is not out of the question. The attitude of the parliament is actually very clear. They don't mind the strength of Emperor Dong's palace. They are afraid that an unrivaled Emperor Dong's palace will lose its goal in the future. As for me, Dongqing Wudi laughed at himself and said, if you are not going to kill Li Guangtu, I have no attitude. I am just a lobbyist, but I am not going to persuade you. After a long silence, Dongqing Wudi seemed to have made up his mind and said faintly, you are my son, whether you admit it or not, it is a fact. Therefore your attitude is my attitude. I support any decision you make, but I hope your decision is rational. This was the first time that Dongqing Wudi had clearly talked about Li Tianlan's life experience. Although Li Tianlan had understood it before, Li Tianlan's body was stiff in place. After a long time, he slowly opened his mouth and said in a hoarse voice, thank you. The text message prompt sounded on his mobile phone. Dongqing Wudi took out his mobile phone, looked down at the screen, narrowed his eyes and whispered, Li Huaqing is here. Chapter 12:10. A kind of unexpected emotion spread in Dongqing Wudi's heart. Li Huaqing came. Why did he come here? What was he doing here? This seemingly abrupt action of the other party suddenly showed an unusual flavor. Dongqing Wudi was a little confused and instinctively vigilant. I talked to him not long ago. After that, I set off here as soon as possible. Dongqing Wudi looked at Li Tianlan. Under normal circumstances, he should be waiting for my news in the Hidden Dragon Sea. He came here at this time. He came with bad intentions? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. It's hard to say. It's not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. Dongqing Wudi shook his head. I understand. It mainly depends on how I deal with Li Guangtu, right? Li Tianlan flicked his fingers gently, and the burning cigarette between his fingers flew out. The sword energy surged, and the cigarette was directly smashed into the finest powder. A flame floated in front of him for a moment, and then went out. He really cares about the purgatory of heaven capital and Li Kuangtu. Is he so impatient? Li Tianlan's tone was mocking. Maybe he was stimulated by the divine list ranking. Dongqing Wudi's voice was a little irritated. Everything seemed to be getting out of control. Li Huaqing couldn't wait to rush to Xianyuan City. Not to mention anything else. At least it was certain that Li Huaqing's inner thoughts had changed without anyone knowing. What Li Tianlan said was actually right. Li Huaqing came here with bad intentions. On the contrary, the uncertainty of what he said was not necessarily a bad thing, or a good thing was a kind of self-comfort. Li Tianlan was not a fool, and neither was Dongqing Wudi. Both of them knew very well what it meant for Li Huaqing to come to Xianyuan City at this time, before he heard from Dongqing Wudi, and before he was sure of Li Tianlan's attitude. It couldn't be a good thing. The sense of oppression brought by the personal arrival of the president of Zhongzhou State had crushed over half of the territory of Zhongzhou State at the moment the news came. In an irresistible gesture, it completely crushed the last leeway between Emperor Dong's palace and the parliament. This was the strength that Li Huaqing rarely showed. The personal arrival of the president was completely different from the arrival of Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi could represent the parliament of Zhongzhou State. He could use any identity to talk to Li Tianlan about Li Kuangtu. If it went well, everyone would be happy. Even if it went badly, it didn't matter. Dongqing Wudi couldn't do it. Next time, Wu Jingmin could do it. If Wu Jingmin couldn't come to an agreement, then Zhou Mulin would come over. Even Zhou Yunhai and Guo Wentian could come to talk to him one by one, confirm Li Tianlan's attitude in the negotiations, and then give him one bargaining chip after another. This is a stalemate process. This was a necessary seesaw process. Many negotiations required probing over and over again. As long as Li Huaqing was different, there would still be room for negotiation. Under normal circumstances, when the negotiation was almost done, Li Huaqing would participate in the last negotiation and make the final decision before taking Li Kuangtu away. It might take a long time, but it wouldn't drag on until after the election. But now, everything in this plan, everything that would have happened under normal circumstances, was skipped over. Li Huaqing did not wait. As the president of Zhongzhou State, he was leading the entire power of Zhongzhou State from Yuzhou to Tiannan. There was no room for negotiation. He was extremely tough. Everyone knew that when Li Huaqing came to Tiannan and left Xianyuan City, there would only be two results. Either Zhongzhou State would take Li Kuangtu away, or Zhongzhou State would destroy Emperor Dong's palace. It was impossible for the second result to happen. The prestige of the president of Zhongzhou State could not be consumed in the endless tug-of-war and negotiations. As long as he came, Li Tianlan would have to give him a result in the shortest time. I'm here. If I can't take him away, I'll kill you. How overbearing was this? Dongqing Wudi's face was livid. He held his mobile phone and seemed to be hesitating whether to call Li Huaqing to sound him out. He had a natural position, so if he called him, Emperor Dong's palace would inevitably be suspected of showing weakness. Li Huaqing had never communicated with Dongqing Wudi from beginning to end. Perhaps he, who was on the plane at this time, was waiting for Dongqing Wudi's call. As long as this call was made, he would know that Emperor Dong's palace was not confident. Let him come. Li Tianlan's essence, qi, and spirit seemed to completely condense in a very short silence. His voice revealed a kind of killing determination that could tear the world apart. And it was as hard as gold and iron. I'll wait here. Why do you have to do this? Dongqing Wudi frowned tightly and held his mobile phone, but he couldn't make the call. Maybe there is another way. There is indeed another way. Li Tianlan nodded. But I don't accept it. His expression and voice were getting calmer and calmer, almost deep. As long as I leave Emperor Dong's palace at this time, Li Huaqing can't do anything. Li Tianlan looked up at the night in the distance and said indifferently, but this is my territory. Why should I leave? Dongqing Wudi walked up to Li Tianlan. In his sight, he saw a trace of extremely fine but shocking scarlet blood in Li Tianlan's pupils. The wind swept through the night. The sword energy between heaven and earth was like a tide, mighty and mighty. The incomparably strong and even fierce fighting aura surged in Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan's calm voice became a little hoarse, as if he was trying to suppress something. How dare he? Even if I dare to see him, I dare. Tianlan. Dongqing Wudi frowned. Li Tianlan didn't continue to speak out his rebellious thoughts in the eyes of others. He stopped speaking and seemed to calm down for a moment. The phone rang again. Dongqing Wudi took a deep look at Li Tianlan, picked up the phone, and said in a deep voice, Qingzhao. Are you in Xianyuan City? Bai Qingzhao's voice on the other end of the phone was hurried and anxious. Yes. Dongqing Wudi said yes. I heard that Li Huaqing saw you not long ago. Do you know that he has gone to Xianyuan City now? What is he doing? What does he want to do? Is he forcing us to take a stand? Or is he forcing Tianlan to take a stand? Bai Qingzhao's exasperated voice sounded on the other end of the phone, sounding sharp and high-pitched. Now the whole upper class of Zhongzhou State knew that Li Guangtu had fallen into Li Tianlan's hands. Everyone knew Li Huaqing's attitude toward Li Guangtu. Everyone also knew that Dongqing Wudi was already in Xianyuan City. At this time, Li Huaqing suddenly rushed to Xianyuan City in person, which had imperceptibly made everyone in the whole parliament tense up, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. At this moment, with Yuzhou as the center, the suffocating sense of oppression was spreading over the whole Zhongzhou state as Li Huaqing approached. Every member of parliament was paying close attention to the development of the incident at this time. Qingzhao, don't worry. We'll deal with it when it comes, Dongqing Wudi said in a deep voice. Maybe there is another possibility. Bai Qingzhao fell silent for a while. After a full 5 minutes he said slowly. Is it possible? Of course, there was another possibility. That was, in the few hours after Li Huaqing and Dongqing Wudi parted, Li Huaqing had a new bargaining chip that could persuade Li Tianlan. And he was extremely confident in his bargaining chip. He was so confident that as long as he proposed it, Li Tianlan would never refuse. But was it possible? In just a few hours, a certain decision couldn't even be considered as careful consideration. And Li Huaqing had never been an impulsive person. The phone rang faintly in the phone. It seemed that Bai Qingzhao's phone rang again. Bai Qingzhao hesitated for a moment, but he did not hang up the phone. Instead, he answered the phone with the other hand. Through the phone. A somewhat hurried and vague voice rang in Bai Qingzhao's ears and echoed in Dongqing Wudi's ears like thunder. Vaguely, the voice with a slight Qingzhou accent on the phone sounded familiar. It seemed to be the voice of a heavyweight in the supervisory department. Qingzhao, the third supervisory group has entered Jiangxia. Chapter 12:11. It was a surprise. It was a surprise. On the other end of the phone, the voice that was separated by 2 communication signals rang in Bai Qingzhao's ears, Dongqing Wudi's ears, and also fell into Li Tianlan's ears. The third supervisory group entered Jiangxia. It was hard to describe what he felt at this moment. It was as if a kind of extreme numbness and coldness rose in his body, along the spine, and hit the brain in an instant. All the pores on his body opened, and his hair stood on end. He didn't know whether it was anger or panic mixed together. His blood flowed wildly in his body, and the excited emotion roared to the high ground of reason. Dongqing Wudi clenched his teeth, and his eyes were bloodshot. A thought kept roaring in his mind. How dare he? What did he want to do? The supervisory system of Zhongzhou State had lasted for hundreds of years. It could be said that it was a group of people that could make any feudal official or feudal lord feel as if they were facing a formidable enemy. The members of the supervisory group were not fixed, the time of supervision was not fixed, and the scope of supervision was not fixed. Under normal circumstances, the inspection team would only decide on the scope of inspection at the last minute, if there was a major case that caught the attention of the parliament. Otherwise, although there was a fixed premise, the inspection team would usually give a routine notice before the operation after being authorized. There were very few cases of sudden attacks. As for the leader of the supervisory group and the scope of supervision, this kind of authorization was only in the hands of the president. And today, right now, when the new ranking list of the divine list swept the entire dark world, when Li Guangtu was captured by Li Tianlan, and when Li Huaqing decided to ask Emperor Dong's palace for people. The third supervisory group determined its scope of supervision and inspection. Jiangxia. At present, Jiangxia had not received the notice at all. There was no doubt that this was Li Huaqing's sudden attack. When the sense of oppression from the hidden dragon sea crossed thousands of miles and covered Tiannan, the parliament's edge had directly shrouded Jiangxia. The third supervisory group went to Jiangxia. Li Huaqing drew his sword. Dongqing Wudi kept taking deep breaths several times. The feeling of numbness in his scalp was still there, but his eyes had completely calmed down. He didn't know whether this scene was a game or something else, but he saw Li Huaqing's toughness and Li Tianlan's uncompromising attitude. The whole Zhongzhou state seemed to be full of sabers and swords. The fierceness and bloodiness of the battle seemed to be assaulting their senses. Dongqing Wudi held the phone tightly and said lightly, "Who is the leader of the supervisory group?" Wang Wei's team leader, Tang Yang's vice team leader. On the other end of the phone, it seemed that he didn't expect Dongqing Wudi to answer. After a pause, he slowly spoke. Dongqing Wudi narrowed his eyes and remained silent. At this time, the person who was communicating with Bai Qingzhao was one of the backbone forces of the giant group, as well as the representative of all the forces of the giant group in the Ministry of Supervision. The fact that he could get the intelligence so accurately was enough to show his power in the Ministry of Supervision. Bai Qingzhao said something to the other party on the other side of the phone, and then hung up. Bai Qingzhao was not angry. He seemed to have calmed down as well. He said quietly, "Should we do something?" "Of course. It's not our style to do nothing when they're already knocking on our door." Dongqing Wudi twitched the corner of his mouth and sneered. Wang Wei, Tang Yang. They were the current leader and deputy leader of the Third Inspectorate Group. Wang Wei was the former governor of Liaodong. He retired 2 years ago, but he had great prestige in the academics. Tang Yang was an inspector at the level of deputy governor of the Ministry of Supervision, and was also one of the backbone forces of the academics. These two people served as the first and second leaders of the Third Inspectorate Group. Obviously, Li Huaqing had made up his mind to monopolize the results of the Inspectorate Group's inspection of Jiangxia. What was Jiangxia? Not only the parliament, but all the people in Zhongzhou state who knew that the new group was about to rise knew very well that Jiangxia was the core base camp of the new group. The new group had only risen for a short time, so the talent reserve was inevitably insufficient. Many of the territories that the new group conquered needed to be replaced by people from Jiangxia. At present, Speaker Jiankong of Jiangxia, Governor Dongqing Qiuqi, and even 5 or 6 provincial councillors of Jiangxia could be said to be popular figures after the election, especially Jiankong, who was the first secretary of Wu Zhengmin, the current deputy prime minister of Zhongzhou state. He was a super capable man promoted by Wu Zhengmin. After Zhou Yuanshan was transferred to Nanyue, he had been the speaker for just over 2 years, but now he had become the main figure promoted by the new group. After the election, he was very likely to enter the parliament. If Li Tianlan could push him into the parliament, then the new group's layout in Zhongzhou state would be easier and more powerful. Headed by Jiankong, Dongqing Qiuqi, 5 or 6 provincial councillors of Jiangxia province, and even the first and second leaders of the local municipal governments were now people of concern. This was the power that the Li family had suppressed and accumulated for many years. They were the elites of the elites. Almost everyone had the ability to take on greater responsibilities. Whether they could go up a step and what position they could reach depended on the explosive power of the new group in the period before the election. This battle array could directly determine the scale and foundation of the new group. At this time, Li Huaqing let the third supervisory group enter Jiangxia. There was no doubt that it was a drastic measure. This knife stabbed straight at Li Tianlan, and the key points of the whole new group. Even if the supervisory group was nitpicking and found a little problem, Li Huaqing would have the possibility to completely magnify it. This could completely affect the explosive power of the new group at the last moment, completely suppress their future scale, and the right to speak in Zhongzhou state. What the hell happened? When the list of the divine list came out, Dongqing Wudi originally thought that Li Huaqing would further increase his bargaining chip, But he did not expect that what he waited for was Li Huaqing's almost reckless suppression. What happened on Earth did not seem to matter anymore. What mattered was what he should do after Li Tianlan showed his attitude. Was this kind of suppression a warning to the giant group? A warning to Dongqing Wudi not to interfere in the affairs of the new group? Did he want to isolate Li Tianlan and the new group and make them feel more pressure? Dongqing Wudi sneered. After hanging up the phone with Bai Qingzhao, he quickly found Bai Qingqian's phone number and dialed it. At the same time in Yuzhou. After hanging up the phone, Bai Qingzhao walked out of the study and saw Bai Zhanfang sitting silently in the living room, drinking tea. What did Wudi say? Bai Zhanfang glanced at him and took the initiative to ask. He said that if we do nothing when others have come to fight, it's not our style. Bai Zhanfang said honestly. Bai Zhanfang was silent for a while, as if he was thinking about something carefully. After a while he suddenly laughed and said, "In that case let's do something." Bai Qingzhao was shocked, and the blood all over his body seemed to be completely boiling with his father's words. He took a deep breath, clenched his fists tightly, and tentatively said, "Then shall we wait for the signal from Liaodong?" Waiting for the signal from Liaodong was undoubtedly the best way to fight back against the third supervisory group. Bai Zhanfang smiled indifferently and said, "There's no need to be so troublesome. We old guys are still here. Why let the younger generation do it?" He lowered his eyelids and said lightly, "Your Uncle Zhou is already on his way." Chapter 12:12. When the melodious ringtone of the mobile phone rang again in the roaring rotors, Li Huaqing looked down at the mobile phone. The light on the mobile phone screen had dimmed slightly. The upper right corner of the screen showed that his mobile phone still had 17% battery. The beautiful land and rivers of Zhongzhou State were moving backward unhurriedly under the helicopter. Li Huaqing's eyes lit up for a moment, but the glimmer of light dimmed again when he saw the caller ID on the screen. His mobile phone kept ringing. Since he got on the helicopter, his mobile phone had been ringing. The strong wind brought by the helicopter whistled through the entire Zhongzhou State in the night. He went all the way south, leaving Yuzhou with an absolute sense of oppression, passing through Yan and Zhao, Zhongyuan, North Lake and South Lake, and entering Xia. After replenishing in Xia, he rushed to Nanyun, Tiannan, Xianyuan City, and Emperor Dong's palace. No one saw Li Huaqing's hesitation. Countless backbone of the academics, retired old people, and then Hua Zhengyang, Zhou Yinhai, Ji Wenzhang, Wan Qingyan, Yi Dongsheng, and even Wang Qinglei. Phone calls rang one after another. Sometimes when he was talking, there was already a notification tone that someone else was calling him. But the phone call he was most looking forward to never rang. He moved forward in silence. The other party responded with silence. Tiannan was getting closer and closer. Li Huaqing looked down at the phone screen that was still lit up and narrowed his eyes. It was Guo Wentian's phone call. Now he finally couldn't sit still anymore. He twitched the corner of his mouth, swiped the phone, and answered the call. Guo Wentian on the other end of the phone did not speak for a while, as if he did not know what to say. Li Huaqing did not speak either, just waiting for Guo Wentian to speak. Guo Wentian's breathing became more and more obvious. His personal position, the position of the Prince Group, and his position in Zhongzhou State, each position was constantly contradictory to what he wanted to say and his attitude. From his breathing, Li Huaqing could clearly hear his constant struggle and entanglement. "Is it too urgent?" Guo Wentian was silent for nearly a minute before he whispered and asked hesitantly, "Are you afraid?" Li Huaqing laughed. His words were so blunt that they were a little harsh. Guo Wentian was not angry. Instead, he was silent for a long time, and then he said slowly, "I don't know." Li Huaqing did not say anything. Guo Wentian continued, "I don't know if I'm afraid. I don't even know what I'm afraid of. Are you afraid? Are you afraid that he will kill me?" Li Huaqing's smile was obvious. "He has the guts," Guo Wentian said in a deep voice, and then continued with a sigh. "At his age, it doesn't matter if he pierces the sky. He's so young and has this kind of strength. That's why there are restrictions." Li Huaqing said blandly, "I'm not afraid that he will kill me, and we haven't reached that point yet. But I'm afraid that he will leave Zhongzhou State. This is not the result I want." Guo Wentian snorted unconsciously. Of course, he was afraid of Li Tianlan leaving Zhongzhou state. The parliament was aggressive. If Li Tianlan really fell out with Zhongzhou state out of anger, Guo Wentian could be sure that he would not survive, not to mention what would happen to Li Huaqing. This was the absolute dominance of extreme personal force. As the number one on the divine list from Zhongzhou state, if he was forced to leave Zhongzhou state, the anger and hatred in his heart could make Li Tianlan do anything in his extreme thoughts. No one in the whole Zhongzhou state could stop Li Tianlan's assassination. This was probably the way to perish together with him. Because if Li Tianlan really did this, no country in the world would dare to accept him, and his end was already doomed. Guo Wentian silently thought about all kinds of possibilities, and finally said in a low voice, "You are playing with fire." On the contrary, this is the safest way to do it. Li Huaqing said blandly. There was a harsh sound from the phone, and there was only 10% battery left. Li Huaqing sighed softly. You still don't understand. He didn't explain anything and silently hung up the phone. Perhaps the whole Zhongzhou state now thought that he was playing with fire, but the safest way was actually his way now. The supervisory group's entry into Jiangxia was just the first step. If Li Tianlan didn't agree to hand over Li Guangtu, more obvious and stronger suppression would follow tomorrow morning. Li Huaqing would not go easy on him. This time he would try his best to suppress the living space of Emperor Dong's palace at all levels. This was not to force Li Tianlan to leave Zhongzhou state. On the contrary, it was to better keep him in Zhongzhou state. So Li Huaqing came in person. In the stormy suppression, Li Huaqing sent himself to Li Tianlan. From an objective point of view, it was equivalent to giving his life to Li Tianlan. Li Huaqing was very sure that as long as he was still in Emperor Dong's palace, no matter how fierce the parliament's next move was, Li Tianlan would not really leave Zhongzhou state. The reason? The reason was that he was still by Li Tianlan's side. It was so simple, but not simple. As long as he was in Emperor Dong's palace, this was the biggest leeway. It seemed that all kinds of means to fall out with him were just the parliament showing its strength. The parliament also had to show its strength. Not everything could be negotiated. Li Huaqing was very clear about this. Perhaps Li Tianlan himself didn't know how terrible the consequences would be after mastering such strength and power at his age, and how serious the disaster might be to Zhongzhou state if there were no corresponding restrictions. Youth represented unlimited potential. When Li Tianlan had fulfilled his potential, his youth represented immaturity, a dangerous mindset that wandered outside the rules at any time. This was unacceptable to Li Huaqing. So in any case he had to find a strong opponent for Li Tianlan. Even if this opponent would fail, it didn't matter because it would take time. During this time, Li Tianlan would really mature and understand what he should do. Li Huaqing silently glanced at the phone. On the phone call from Dongqing Wudi or Li Tianlan that he had been expecting never rang. Even from the beginning to the present, he had never received any call from the new group or the giant group. Li Huaqing's eyes gradually became dignified. In the unusual silence he clearly smelled a touch of fighting and gunpowder. The helicopter flew over Nanyuan and the first city in Tiannan. The brightly lit Xianyuan city was close at hand. President, we will arrive at Emperor Dong's palace soon. Ma Si sat opposite Li Huaqing and said in a serious and dignified voice. Li Huaqing took a last look at the phone, said yes, and closed his eyes. The plane flew over the lights of Xianyuan city. Ma Si stood up and planned to go to the cockpit to say something to the pilot. At the same time, on the soft lawn of Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan, who stood with Dongqing Wudi but rarely spoke, raised his head and glanced at the night sky in the distance. At this moment, the sound of the helicopter's rotors had not yet come from afar. Emperor Dong's palace was quiet in the night. Li Tianlan raised one hand to the night where only the signal lights were flashing in the distance. Boom! In an instant, with Li Tianlan as the center, the world suddenly twisted. The surging and incredible sword energy surged, and the sharp sword intent was completely boiling. The world was torn apart in an instant, and the whole night was completely replaced by sword energy. Like a vast ocean, the sword energy stirred the night tens of thousands of meters away in an instant along the direction where Li Tianlan raised his hand. The sharp sword energy spread noisily. The helicopter that had just entered the sky above Xianyuan City was out of control instantly. The rotating rotors were silently cut into pieces by the sword energy. The helicopter flying in the air suddenly spun and rolled in the air, smashing into the lights on the ground. Li Tianlan raised his hand and closed it slightly. The sword energy all over the sky vibrated at the same time. The falling helicopter seemed to be gripped by an invisible hand at this moment. With the overwhelming sword energy, the helicopter was directly pulled by the invisible hand and rushed into Emperor Dong's palace at an unimaginable speed. The cabin was spinning. Li Huaqing's face was abnormally ruddy. Ma Si fell in the corner with a broken head and a desperate look on his face. The endless sword energy pulled the helicopter from the edge of Xianyuan City all the way to Li Tianlan. The helicopter crashed to the ground, and the huge fuselage slid out of control on the lawn, leaving a deep mark hundreds of meters long. The solid landing gear and the glass in the cabin were completely shattered. Dense cracks appeared on the black fuselage, which had originally looked very majestic, under the wrath of the sword chi. The ridiculously broken helicopter slid all the way and stopped less than 5 meters away from Li Tianlan. With a dull sound, the heavy cabin door of the helicopter fell to the ground, splashing a cloud of smoke and dust. Li Tianlan squinted and looked at Li Huaqing in the cabin, who was facing him motionlessly because of the seat belt. He said expressionlessly, "You're too slow. I'll give you a hand. Welcome to Xianyuan City. Welcome to Emperor Dong's palace." Chapter 12-13. The wind under the curtain of night had completely frozen. In the extreme silence, only the cracks on the helicopter were emitting light sounds and spreading. The sword chi was silent, but it was everywhere. Fine and sharp, it moved around the helicopter, from the cockpit to the fuselage, and then to the tail. More and more cracks appeared. It was as if a pale white flower had suddenly bloomed on the pitch-black fuselage of the helicopter. Irregular patterns were quietly spreading, as if to surround the entire huge fuselage. Dizziness, anger, helplessness, solemnity. All kinds of emotions and perceptions kept tumbling in Li Huaqing's heart. His body seemed to be immersed in the dizziness of the helicopter out of control and rolling in the air. At that moment, the world was spinning, and death seemed to have shown a grim sneer in the night outside the cabin. The majestic sword energy wrapped the helicopter and kept accelerating, dragging them to Emperor Dong's palace, as if death was mercilessly pulling them into hell. At that moment, what Li Huaqing felt was not fear, but a sense of weightlessness that was completely beyond his control. The helicopter's engine seemed to be barely able to maintain stability, but that kind of power was too fragile under the sword energy. All the stability was completely destroyed in an instant. The sword energy surrounded and pulled him, and the seat belt that held his body in place tightened to the limit. After the world spun around him, his body leaned forward crazily under the violent pull. The bulletproof glass of the cabin was shattered by the sword energy, and the warm night wind of Tiannan poured into the cabin violently under the absolute acceleration, bringing with it an indescribable coldness. This feeling would never be forgotten. If this was a show of strength, then it could only be said that this show of strength was really powerful. He was showing the power of Zhongzhou state to Li Tianlan. And now, Li Tianlan was also showing his own power to him. He heard Li Tianlan's emotionless voice, and felt the omnipresent sharpness in Emperor Dong's palace. The sharp sharpness covered the sky and the earth. It was so sharp that it was almost fearless and directly pressed against his heart. Phew, Li Huaqing let out a long breath. Li Tianlan stood outside the cabin, motionless like a statue, looking at him with no expression. Li Huaqing took a deep look at him, unfastened the seat belt, walked to the corner of the cabin, and pulled Ma Si up. Ma Si had fallen into a coma. When the helicopter lost control, Ma Si unbuckled her seat belt and stood up. The out-of-control helicopter tumbled in the air. Caught off guard, Ma Si's body also lost control and crashed into the metal door in front of the cockpit. He instinctively grabbed the nearest handrail, but as the sword chi pulled the helicopter, the sudden acceleration directly threw Ma Si to the other side of the cabin. Under the huge impact, the top secret of Zhongzhou state, directly fainted. Li Huaqing pulled up his secretary with some difficulty. Before he could drag Ma Si out of the cabin, Dongcheng Wudi had already walked in first. "Leave it to me. I'll treat his wound." Dongcheng Wudi smiled and lifted Ma Si with great ease. Then he went to the cockpit, picked up the driver who was also unconscious, and looked at Li Huaqing. Li Huaqing pondered for a moment and nodded. He knew very well that at this time, no matter where Dongcheng Wudi stood, he did not want to stay between him and Li Tianlan. This was also acceptable for him and Li Tianlan. Without Dongcheng Wudi here, Li Huaqing, who faced Li Tianlan alone, would feel more pressure. And precisely because of his absence, Li Huaqing was also more likely to have a deeper talk with Li Tianlan. Li Huaqing quickly left the scene with the two wounded. Li Huaqing sat in the broken cabin for a while. When the dizziness in his mind almost disappeared, he took a deep breath and walked out of the cabin. The helicopter will be towed away to check the fault. Fortunately, if it hadn't broken down near Emperor Dong's palace, the consequences would have been unpredictable. Li Tianlan said lightly. "Fault." Li Huaqing's eyes narrowed and he said with a smile. "So I should thank you for saving my life?" "You're welcome." Li Tianlan was still expressionless. Li Huaqing smiled. He was very curious as to why he could smile now. All his actions since he came to the stage seemed very gentle. But gentleness did not mean that he had no temper, nor did it mean that he would appear to be weak. In fact, in the hearts of many people, the gentle and calm Li Huaqing was far more deterrent than the other counselors who banged the table and roared. But at this moment, Li Huaqing was really not angry. Even if the young man in front of him attacked him, destroyed a helicopter, and even made him and his secretary extremely embarrassed, his heart was calm. Maybe it was because he valued him too much, and in his heart, he also had too many expectations for him. Li Huaqing never knew that he would value a person so much and be optimistic about his future, even though the two of them were now on opposite sides. The third supervisory group's entry into Jiangxia is just the beginning, Li Huaqing said. In the next few months, the 1st to the 10th supervisory groups will be sent out one after another. The inspection scope is very large, including Wuyue, Liaodong, Beihai, Nanyue, Southwest and Northern City. This is the normal inspection tour before the election. Jiangxia is just the first stop. This time, the 3rd supervisory group's inspection scope is Jiangxia, Jianghuai and Huading. I believe you really. Li Tianlan nodded lightly, and his tone was a little careless. He did believe what Li Huaqing said, but it did not mean that the 3rd supervisory group had no other purpose in entering Jiangxia. Whether they had other purposes or not, Li Huaqing's word stood. Li Huaqing turned his head to look at Li Tianlan and suddenly laughed. He reached out and pointed at Li Tianlan. "You boy, I know you have emotions, so when I just came to Emperor Dong's palace, you gave me a show of strength. Why? Or are you unhappy? Do you want to beat me to vent your anger?" Li Tianlan turned his head to look at Li Huaqing, and the corner of his mouth twitched symbolically. "I can understand your emotions, and even understand what you think of me now. But in my current position, I have things I should do." "I don't have emotions," Li Tianlan said lightly. "But there is one thing that needs to be clarified. You came at the wrong time. At this time, it is difficult for Emperor Dong's palace to really welcome you." "Oh. Why?" Li Huaqing smiled casually. "Next, I will deal with some internal affairs that belong to our Li family, or the family affairs of the Li family. This is our own business, and we will not welcome anyone who wants to intervene. How do you know that I am going to intervene in this matter?" Li Huaqing was calm. Li Tianlan did not answer him, but smiled casually and said, "It's best that you are not. Maybe I misunderstood." He paused and continued, "But many people seem to be very interested in the family affairs of the Li family. Maybe you don't want to intervene, but others seem to be ready to intervene." He looked at Li Huaqing and suddenly laughed. "I'm going to stay in Xianyuan City during this period of time. I'd like to see exactly what kind of things dare to extend their claws towards me and interfere in my family's affairs. If I really see them, I'll chop them into pieces. I think you won't mind, right?" Li Huaqing stopped laughing. He looked at Li Tianlan and narrowed his eyes. Li Tianlan was also looking at him. The two of them stared at each other. They were expressionless. You're tuning into the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.